One day, huge towers began to appear all over the world. No one knew their origin, but it was clear to everyone that they were connected with magic. Many were delighted by the appearance of mythical creatures living in the towers, but for some it became a disaster. Horrible monsters from the dungeons increasingly came out beyond the magic towers. To protect the world, the Chosen Ones began to explore the dungeons and clear them of monsters. To fight the monsters, the Chosen Ones had to have superpowers. Over time, these daredevils began to be called superheroes. Since childhood, the boy was fascinated by superheroes, not missing a single piece of news about them. He admired how superheroes used their powers to help people. He craved superpowers and worldwide fame, so he decided that he would become one of the Chosen Ones. To do this, he began to study diligently, immersing himself in complex disciplines day and night. The first step was simple books on mana management. Year after year, he moved on to complex treatises, spending all his time on this. Soon he had read almost every book in the country. Students gathered at the board to see the results of the academy exams. Martin does not hide his joy. He passed the exam and took first place. Now he's at the academy, his dream of becoming a superhero is starting to come true. In his second year, Martin receives a letter. He learns that he is ranked 274th in the rankings. Martin loses a training fight and sees insurmountable obstacles in his path. He realizes that he lacks the innate abilities of superheroes and decides to leave the academy. Trying to forget his dream, Martin plunges headlong into writing adventure novels. He has spent the last year creating fictional stories about great heroes and their legendary battles. In his stories, huge towers, sources of magical energy appear. Martin comes up with a superhero who can control mana and wield all kinds of weapons. His stories also feature a mysterious hermit living in a forest of death. Martin describes what he was unable to achieve in reality. As he finishes his last story, he is sad, realizing that this is only a fictional world. Martin tries to finish the ending but can't find a suitable ending. He decides to take a rest so that after sleep he can finish his story. Martin turns on the television, switching to his favorite channel to catch up on the latest news. The announcer announces that the sacred hero is returning home after long wanderings. The announcer's voice reports that the superheroes have cleared most of the towers, and the world has become even closer to peace. Martin admires the young hero who has already become famous throughout the world. He wonders why he doesn't have the natural abilities needed to be a superhero. Martin is confident that he put in more effort than others. Frustrated, he falls onto his bed, deciding to forget about his superhero career. Martin falls asleep, and at that moment, his computer turns on by itself. A program appears on the screen, announcing the creation of towers, just like in his stories. The program confirms the successful creation of the new tower. With the first rays of the sun, morning comes and light penetrates into Martin's room. A loud voice of the announcer comes from the TV. Martin fell asleep, forgetting to turn it off. The announcer is alarmed. 5 new towers have appeared in the country overnight, an unprecedented event. There is a live broadcast from the scene. The reporter lists the names of the towers. Martin wakes up instantly. The names of the towers are exactly like in his stories. He can't believe his ears and rushes to the computer to check the information. Alarmed, Martin discovers that all the files containing his stories have disappeared. He carefully checks all directories and folders, but there are no files anywhere. Martin stands frozen in the middle of the room, listening to the announcer as he reports that the government has begun to stabilize the situation. The guy can't believe what's happening, thinking that it's just a dream. A virtual screen appears in front of Martin, informing him that his stories have been used to create the towers. He tries to calm down, still not believing what is happening. The screen informs that Martin is the true owner of the 7 towers and receives a unique diving skill. Martin doesn't understand how towers with the names of his characters could appear in reality. The screen informs you that the diving skill has been successfully activated. Martin, being an ordinary person, now has a unique class. He sits in front of the screen, realizing that with this skill he has a chance to become a superhero. Martin tries to use the skill, but to no avail. The screen informs that activation is not possible due to a large difference in characteristics. Martin is disappointed to learn that the skill requires additional conditions to be met. He understands that it takes serious preparation to use a new skill. Martin heads to the store, thinking about what goal to choose for the dive and what emotions and character to set. Martin reaches for a quick lunchbox, deciding that he needs to get some food first and then deal with his newfound strength. His thoughts are interrupted by footsteps. He turns slowly. There is a girl standing in front of him, happily saying that she is glad to see him. Martin recognizes his old friend from the academy, Emma. Emma, a successful student with unique ice skills, once studied with him. They became close at the academy when Martin helped her with her homework at her mother's request. However, Martin avoided communication, fearing that she knew about his constant defeats in battles. Emma notices that they haven't seen each other for a long time and asks what's new with Martin. She's sincerely glad to meet him and remembers their studies together. Emma notices the smell of alcohol on Martin and asks why he drinks during the day. She is worried that he has problems and is interested in his lifestyle and diet. Martin replies that he is fine and suggests changing the subject by asking about her progress at the academy. Emma tells Martin that he is still remembered at the academy as a student with great potential. She mentions that there are rumors that the Sky Palace Guild was trying to recruit him. This guild is one of the 3 strongest in the country, and it is very difficult for ordinary students to get in. Martin is surprised that he is still remembered after leaving the academy. He says he's glad to meet you, but it's time to go home. Suddenly, the store is filled with Everton's powerful energy. Martin strains to collect his thoughts. He notices a stranger in the corner and assumes that he is a demon follower. Martin tries to understand how and why this man appeared here. Emma notices Martin's anxiety and asks what happened. The demon follower begins to emit dark energy. The man loses consciousness and falls to the floor next to Martin and Emma. Emma wants to help, but Martin orders her to stay put. Martin understands that Everton's follower is trying to summon the Blood Wolves. Dark energy opens a huge portal, and Martin and Emma watch with alarm. Blood Wolves, summoned by Everton's follower, begin to emerge from the energy portal. They move slowly towards the store's visitors. Screams are heard. People run away in panic, escaping from the wolves. Horrified customers try to leave the store as quickly as possible. Panic sets in as the wolves attack, turning the store into chaos. This attack was organized by a group of demon worshippers who hate the 7 superheroes and are ready to do anything for their goals. Martin immediately understands who is behind this, because this organization was in his last novel. Emma sees a group of people trapped and sets out to help them. She tells Martin that he needs to save people, but remembers that he has no superpowers. Emma asks Martin to distract the wolves while she protects the people. Martin feels stressed, knowing that his only useful skill is his ability to run fast. A huge bloody wolf approaches him, growling, but in no hurry to attack. Martin is overcome with fear, but carefully watches the movements of the blood wolf, trying to anticipate the attack. The wolf lets out a wild roar and rushes at him. Martin manages to dodge, but the wolf's paw still leaves a wound on his face. Realizing that he won't survive without a weapon, he grabs a sign standing nearby. Martin uses it to fight off the beast. The attack is repelled, but the wolves are preparing to attack again. Martin doubts that he can withstand the next attack and wants to call Emma for help, but sees that she is busy protecting people. In desperation, he decides to use the immersion technique, remembering his original story. A huge magical tower from his novels appears in his mind. Martin recalls one of his characters, a swordsman cutting through the horizon. He decides to borrow his abilities using the dive skill. Martin commands the skill to activate, and a virtual screen appears warning of a critical difference in strength, which threatens instant death. He is upset about his failure to activate the diving skill. Enraged, Martin tries to activate the skill again. He forces himself to calm down and chooses a target to dive into from the 7 available heroes. Martin feels the change in energy around him and knows he made the right decision. He focuses on the memory of a hero who can help. The guy enters into an energetic connection with the hero and feels that the attempt will be successful. Martin activates the skill, and the screen confirms a successful dive. Magic towers combine reality and myth, and only the right balance allows one to use their power. The tower owner must strike this balance precisely to make the fantasy become reality. Martin feels the energy of the novel's hero, who has his own tower. Once immersed, he gains the skills and strength of the chosen hero, preparing to destroy the Blood Wolves. Martin rushes into battle using the magic of the gatekeeper described in his novel. The guard's job is to confront superior forces with a small army. A huge bloody wolf roars and rushes at Martin. Martin uses the pointer like a spear, delivering precise strikes at the beast. In battle, his blows become stronger and his maneuvering skill is activated. With these skills, Martin methodically destroys wolves. With only the leader of the pack left alive, Martin prepares for the final battle. The leader of the pack suddenly turns around and tries to escape, realizing that he cannot defeat Martin. But Martin has no intention of letting him go. He throws a pointer that catches and destroys the beast. Emma uses her unique ice skill to save the shop's customers. She then asks people if anyone needs medical attention. Emma thinks about Martin, remembering that he has not yet awakened his magical abilities. To her surprise, Martin stands among the fallen Everton Bloodwolves. At this point, the immersion skill is disabled and an exhausted Martin falls to the floor. Martin is extremely happy that he now knows how to manage the diving skill. The virtual screen tells Martin that his body was not prepared for such force, and now he is in for a strong energy backlash, causing physical discomfort. Emma runs up to him, concerned about his condition, and asks if everything is okay. Martin assures her that everything is fine. He is just experiencing severe muscle pain due to a long period of lack of physical activity. The girl is amazed at how Martin was able to repel the attack of the blood wolves without any visible skills. Martin is proud of himself. He single-handedly stopped an entire flock of hellish monsters. Emma believes that the training at the academy paid off, unaware of his diving skills. Martin realizes that he can use the dive skill through secondary characters that are appropriate for his level. Martin still suffers from recurring energy relapses that haunt him. Having decided that he needs to develop endurance, he falls asleep with this thought. A loud ringing sound wakes him up, but Martin is in no hurry to answer. After some time, he finally picks up the phone and reads the message. Suddenly inspired, Martin rushes to the computer to test the new idea. Martin still feels unwell from the energy rebounds. After receiving numerous messages, he realizes that the incident at the store has become widely known. Sitting down at the computer, Martin sees that the news about the attack is already on all information platforms. The information that the academy students saved people from monsters instantly spread across the internet. He answers a call from Emma, who tells him that he has become famous. Since childhood, Martin dreamed of becoming a superhero, and now he feels like his life is starting to change for the better. The phone never stops ringing. Old acquaintances are vying with each other to meet. Martin decides that this is his moment, and now his life as a superhero begins. On the subway, he immerses himself in reading breaking news on his phone. When the magic towers first appeared, superheroes rushed to conquer them. The most successful superheroes who conquered the towers received rare skills and worldwide popularity with millions of fans. Martin reads that the difficulty of the towers has grown to an impossible level. The Swordmaster's Tower is based on Martin's stories, and no one has been able to enter it. The guy has a hard time walking fast. He thinks he needs to train more. Martin catches his breath as he finally reaches the Swordmaster's magical tower. The majestic appearance of the tower delights him. He approaches the stone at the entrance, feeling the powerful energy of the 7 heroes. Martin is surprised to see words carved into the stone that previously only existed in his imagination. A sudden cry from a stranger distracts him, and he warns Martin to be careful. The stranger, noticing that Martin is here for the first time, advises him not to touch everything. Martin knows that the tower can be entered by touching the right magic item. As he approaches the large stone near the tower, a powerful energetic connection is created. The tower recognizes Martin as the true owner. Martin hears a voice inviting him to enter the magic tower. In the blink of an eye, he finds himself in a grassy clearing inside the tower. Martin is filled with joy, but he doesn't understand how exactly he got here. Inside the tower, behind a large screen, sits a superhero, unhappy with the presence of a stranger near his tower. The superhero finds the situation strange and contemptuously calls Martin an idiot. Scanning Martin's mana, the superhero discovers that he is an ordinary person. Using surveillance systems, George continues to monitor Martin and notices that something is wrong with him. He decides to invite Martin inside the tower to sort things out. George, the owner of the tower, orders the boy to be brought to the first floor of the Swordmaster's Tower. Meanwhile, on a busy street, a talk show about conquering magic towers is shown on a big screen. Martin recalls how he recently made superhuman efforts to become a superhero, but in the practical exam, he came in last and was labeled a loser. A virtual screen appears next to Martin with a message inviting him inside the magic tower. The screen abruptly calls on him to stop playing the loser and enter the tower. Martin is surprised to learn that the tower's owner has lowered the difficulty level for entry, which catches his attention. He wonders how the tower owner can change the level of protection. Martin begins to realize that George may be very different from the character he created in his stories. Martin recalls the story of his fictional hero, who, with the help of his teacher, awakened mana, defeated enemies, and became a famous superhero. Previously, he could not even imagine that he would ever be able to talk to the main character of his book. Martin thinks about other ways to get into the tower, but his thoughts are interrupted by a loud scream. A majestic dragon soars in the sky above the guy. Martin looks at it in fascination. He remembers that in 50 minutes, disaster-class monsters will appear. Martin decides to take action because staying put means certain death. He tries to figure out where he is, feeling the damp soil of the meadow under his feet. Looking around, he sees many strange pieces of wood. Martin picks one up and looks at it closely. He realizes that these are fragments of wooden training swords. Martin continues to study the fragments of wooden swords, recalling the first chapter of his novel. He realizes that he is in a tower where a talentless boy awakened his talent. Taking a piece of wood, Martin crafts a wooden training sword. Realizing that the opening part of the novel takes place in this very tower, he begins to train intensively. Martin hopes that he will soon be able to penetrate the first floor of the magic tower. The protagonist is tormented by doubts. Although the towers were created based on his novel, he is not sure that the mission will be successful. Martin realizes that the more he doubts, the less time he has. The boy angrily thrusts his wooden training sword into the ground. He holds the sword tightly and feels it hitting something. Martin digs up a magical plant from the ground that can permanently increase his magical powers. The guy looks around and notices a rare magical plant around him. Without delay, he begins to greedily eat the woven coconut fiber. The plant not only looks terrible, but it also tastes disgusting. Despite this, the guy forces himself to continue eating. The virtual screen informs that there are 45 minutes left before the monsters appear. Martin orders himself to pull himself together and continues eating the vile plant in order to survive. The guy is suffering from nausea and stomach pain, and he doesn't remember how many plants he ate. Martin experiences increased mana perception, but his physical condition deteriorates. Having accumulated enough mana, he prepares to transfer it into the sword, as the hero of his novel did. George, sitting on his throne in the tower, watches Martin in surprise, amazed at his knowledge of the magical plant. George suspects that the guy knows more about the magic tower than he seems, because it is impossible to learn about the plant by accident. Martin concentrates magical energy, remembering his novel. A young sorceress named Alice lost all of her partners in an unsuccessful raid on demons. Having met George, she taught him how to control mana, since the guy then did not know how to control it and harmed himself. Alice was always helping others and eventually became George's first teacher. Martin chooses her for the next dive. He picks up the wooden sword and infuses it with magic. He thrusts his sword into the ground with great force, and a whirlwind of energy engulfs him. Martin shouts loudly, invoking the dive skill. Flashes of energy illuminate the space. The immersion into a high-level magician is successfully completed. George watches Martin closely and, jumping up from his chair, feels a familiar energy. He can't understand who the guy is, but he feels the mana of his teacher. Martin slowly purifies his mana, channeling it from his heart to his fingertips and into his sword. The magical flow of mana begins to get out of control, draining him greatly. George is amazed by the boy's skill as he watches him try to control mana. Martin hears a voice warning him that further manipulation could be fatal. Martin realizes the threat. The movement of mana can cause anomalies in the body. Despite the danger, he continues his magical manipulations, not wanting to passively await his fate. His body experiences severe overload, but he, with incredible effort, maintains control over the mana. The energy funnel around him disappears. The wind dies down, and an oppressive silence sets in. Martin, exhausted, leans on his wooden sword, barely able to hold himself together. A talk show host is broadcasting live, greeting her viewers. She reports that many superheroes have gathered near the magic tower, deciding to try their luck. She reports that no one has been able to enter the tower for the past 2 weeks. A girl approaches a random superhero, asking for permission to do an interview. She asks what he thinks about the difficulty of breaking into the new magic tower. The TV presenter wonders whether anyone will be able to get inside today. The guy claims to know about the tower's connection with combat swords. He is confident that he will soon have more information, and he will easily clear the new magic tower. Suddenly, a message comes that the first floor of the tower is cleared and the passage is temporarily blocked. Those present are amazed. No one understands who did this and when. Operators discuss the unexpected clearing of the first floor of the tower. They believe that a mysterious and powerful newcomer has appeared among the superheroes. The operators notice that something is happening at the entrance to the tower, and they can get an exclusive interview. Hearing this, the host orders everyone to immediately run to the entrance of the magic tower. In her haste, she does not notice Martin lying in her path and accidentally steps on him. Looking back, the girl looks closely at Martin, struck by his complete stillness. She can't tell if he's asleep or unconscious. The cameraman hurries her, and the presenter, having apologized to Martin, continues running. The main character gradually comes to his senses and gathers his strength to get up. When he wakes up, he is surprised to notice that he is outside the tower. Martin doesn't understand how he ended up outside, since he cleared the first floor. Suddenly, he clearly hears George's voice, and is surprised that the owner of the tower can communicate with him even outside of it. George explains that he can talk to him both inside and outside the magic tower. Seeing Martin's confused look, George can't help but laugh. A virtual screen appears in front of the guy, informing him that George can only communicate with him outside the tower. The screen also indicates that George was very interested in the show Martin was putting on inside. George demands that Martin immediately reveal his true identity. Martin replies that the time has not come yet, adding that he was glad to meet George and promises to see him later. George warns that he will not leave him alone and will follow him. Martin takes this calmly, realizing that George cannot be dissuaded. The guy comes home, lies in bed and thinks about how stubborn George is. After rest and a good night's sleep, Martin feels much better. Although the events in the tower seem like a dream to him, he looks at his palm, radiating magical energy, and realizes that everything was real. Martin watches the changes in his body in amazement, not understanding what is happening. His body is overflowing with mana, and he decides to immediately check his stats. Martin finds that his mana has increased sixfold, and his strength, agility, and stamina have increased significantly. He carefully studies the information on the virtual screen and is delighted by the appearance of 7 new skills. Suddenly, he hears George's voice, who notices that Martin has improved quite a bit. George suggests that he check the stats window, hinting that he gave him more than just skills. Martin learns that the mana limit has been completely removed, and sensitivity and control have increased significantly. He jumps out of bed in joyful excitement, and George, smiling, notes that he expected such a reaction. The Academy's grounds house a huge testing and inspection center. Martin passes through the turnstile without any problems. His old student pass is still valid. George's voice can be heard praising him for deciding to practice right away after clearing the first floor. But Martin isn't planning a training session. He wants to test his new fighting abilities. In the corner of the room, a man watches Martin closely with obvious dislike. Martin manages to dodge the flying object at the last moment. Someone threw a soda can at him with such force that the can was crushed. Jacob approaches him from the depths of the room and asks where he has been hiding all this time. Martin is not happy to meet Jacob, who always made his life miserable during his studies. Jacob begins to make offensive jokes without mincing words. Martin reflects on why fate brought him together with Jacob today. Jacob claims that he was wrong to return to the academy, continuing to hurl insults. But Martin barely hears his words, immersed in memories. During his studies, Jacob repeatedly defeated him in duels, showing particular cruelty and bullying. Jacob constantly humiliated Martin. Considering him a second-class person, Jacob threatens Martin, warning him not to dare complain to the teachers. Otherwise, he will destroy him. Martin did not expect to meet his offender so soon and decides that it is time to pay for past humiliations. Jacob approaches him, quietly and mockingly asking permission to beat him up. The voice of the floor duty officer is heard in the corridor, asking what is going on. Not wanting the teachers to find out about his behavior, Jacob stops the attacks. He tells Martin that he was lucky today, but they will meet again. As a parting shot, Jacob delivers a powerful blow from behind and retreats into the depths of the room. Martin decides to keep his emotions in check and focus on testing the features. He presses the button on the front door, and then George's voice is heard, urging him not to be a wimp. However, Martin believes that it is more important to focus on priority tasks rather than wasting time on moral monsters. The guy finds himself in a huge room, and a metallic voice tells him to stay put and not move. A retinal scan and identification takes place, and the test system checks its data. The system asks him what difficulty level he would like to choose, and Martin chooses the minimum. After analyzing Martin's characteristics, the system summons a lower-level monster. The training system offers him to choose a weapon for the upcoming fight. Martin decides to test the level of his new skills and chooses a sword. He is pleased. The sword fits perfectly in his hand. Its weight is almost imperceptible. The body has become mobile, and Martin feels light and confident. He is eager to join the fight, hoping that the battle will be enjoyable. The monster lunges at him, but Martin cuts it in half with a sharp blow. The guy is happy. He defeated the training monster in a few seconds and set an academy record. The next opponent is a more serious enemy, a wild stone wolf of the 3rd level. Students in the main hall watch Martin being tested on a large screen. Jacob notices the noise and commotion around the screen and shows interest in what is happening. Martin's testing is closely monitored by a teacher named Lucas, a Generation Zero superhero with a variety of skills. Jacob approaches Lucas, stating that he has long dreamed of becoming his student and asks to watch videos of his fights. Lucas replies that this might be difficult, since he just discovered an interesting guy. Jacob wonders who could attract the attention of such a teacher. Meanwhile, a huge stone wolf, emitting a loud growl, slowly approaches Martin. Lucas, intrigued, presses the speakerphone button to instruct the guy. He asks Martin if he can hear him well. The teacher's voice distracts Martin for a moment, but he replies that he can hear it perfectly well. Jacob doesn't believe that the teacher has chosen Martin as a candidate and asks Lucas not to rush into a decision. Lucas, forgetting to turn off the speakerphone, allows Martin to hear their conversation. The teacher is pleased with Martin's performance and considers him an interesting and promising candidate. In the next room, a survival test is taking place. where a student must endure extreme cold for 7 hours. The test room has the ability to manipulate the senses, instilling intense fear. Most test takers succumb to this fear, which prevents them from passing the test, but Martin remains unperturbed. The academy teacher is surprised. Martin is not afraid and does not try to escape. Martin prepares to fend off the Stone Wolf's attack, determined to pass the test with flying colors. The teacher presses the speakerphone button, intending to find out whether this guy is a daredevil or a fool. Lucas asks Martin if he can hear him and asks him to answer. Martin cannot hear the voice clearly and does not understand what Lucas wants to tell him. Lucas advises him to get closer to the wolf to find its weak spot. This time Martin clearly hears the instructions and is ready to carry them out. Martin approaches the stone wolf carefully, trying not to provoke it into a premature attack. Having reached the required distance, he suddenly rushes into attack. Martin delivers a series of chopping blows, but the wolf deftly dodges. Now his goal is to find a weak spot in the monster's energy defense. A moment later, he notices a gap in the wolf's scruff. Martin moves forward determinedly, preparing to deliver the finishing blow. Martin hopes he has correctly identified the weak point in the wolf's defenses. He rushes at the enemy, preparing to deliver a powerful blow. The stone wolf counterattacks, but Martin meets it with a well-honed strike from his training sword. The students and teacher stand in front of the screen, admiring and praising Martin. Jacob can't believe his eyes, is amazed by his skills and begins to hate him even more. Lucas notices Jacob's reaction and asks if he knows Martin. Jacob replies that he knows him a little since they were in the same year. Martin, a little tired after the fight, hears George's voice, who notes that the guy did well for a newbie. Martin doesn't understand whether George is praising him or subtly mocking him. He reflects that the pause in training has weakened him and decides to train hard to better utilize the immersion. Martin remembers George and hopes that communicating with him will not make him as unpleasant. His thoughts are interrupted by a loud voice, someone calling his name. Martin turns around and sees Lucas, who tells him that it was he who spoke to him on speakerphone. Martin greets the teacher and asks who he is. Lucas introduces himself and says that he is a teacher at a secret department. Martin tells Lucas that he used to study at the academy but was forced to take an academic leave. Lucas asks which of the teachers taught him so well. Martin replies that he learned most of the knowledge on his own, since the teachers were of little help. All this time, a silent Jacob stands behind Lucas, listening attentively to the conversation. Lucas reassures Martin, saying that there is no need to be offended by teachers because they are different. Then he says that from today, Martin will study with him. Jacob is furious, unable to accept the fact that Martin has been enrolled in the secret faculty instead of him. Jacob considers the teacher's decision unfair because he wields a sword much better than many. He is one of the strongest students of the academy and has sports ranks in martial arts. In addition, Jacob is one of the few who possesses a rare spear fighting technique. Lucas tells Martin that he is ready to teach him anything he wants. The proposal makes Martin happy and surprised. He can hardly contain his emotions. Martin suggests that Lucas has mastered all skill levels to perfection. He realizes what great opportunities will open up for him if Lucas becomes his mentor. Lucas notices the doubt on Martin's face and asks if he trusts him. The teacher assures the guy that in order to win, you need to believe in yourself and not doubt. Lucas is going to conduct a review to see what suits Martin best. He uses his superhero gaze skill to penetrate the boy's mind and learn more about him. Martin feels Lucas trying to magically invade his mind. George suddenly tells Martin not to stand there like a statue and resist the influence. But Martin can't resist Lucas's experience and feels the teacher slowly creeping into his mind. Lucas gains control over his energy channels and reads Martin's mana properties. The results surprise Lucas. He can't believe that the guy has the most ordinary magic. Finding this strange, Lucas decides to conduct a deeper scan. Martin is completely paralyzed, unable to move and begins to choke, desperately trying to push Lucas out of his mind. Suddenly, the hero's mana activates, protecting him. Martin counterattacks, and Lucas senses it instantly. Martin reflects the attack and directs the energy of the superhero's gaze at the teacher. Lucas, impressed by his abilities, again offers to become his apprentice. Martin accepts the offer, expressing his gratitude and considering it a great honor. Lucas is pleased with Martin's response, assuring him that under his leadership the boy will achieve great results. They exchange jokes, and Jacob, standing to the side, looks at them with anger and hatred. Jacob is seething with indignation, believing that, despite his efforts, all the attention is going to Martin. He believes that fate is unfair. The teacher chose Martin, not him. The next day, Martin is sitting at the computer in his cozy apartment. He remembers yesterday and reflects on how his life has changed. Lucas's teacher advises him to rest, because there will be no time for this during training. Lucas warns Martin that training and learning can only end with death. Remembering these words, Martin realizes that severe trials await him. Deciding to take a little rest, he switches to the latest news. His attention is drawn to a message about an alchemist's competition, where the main prize will be an unknown mineral. George, while in the magic tower, watches the guy and learns about the alchemist competition. George recognizes the unknown mineral as the magical bastium stone. Martin recalls that bastium is a rare ore from the Age of Destruction mentioned in his novel. Bastium is an ancient artifact that proves the existence of God. The secrets of the magical mineral were guarded by chosen priests. The imperial family valued bastium highly and invested in its reserves every year. In Martin's novel, the magical stone bastium was an extremely rare material, and its total volume in the world did not exceed 30 kilograms. Martin knows that one of the secrets of bastium is its external inconspicuousness. It looks like an ordinary stone, and only a few can recognize it. George is outraged that such a priceless artifact became a prize at an alchemy competition. Martin speculates that in his novels he simply invented this mineral, never delving into its properties. George insists that Martin must obtain this magic stone at any cost. There is less than a week left until the competition, and George insists on immediate training. George tells Martin that he needs to master the skill of creating magic potions in a short time. Magic potions are widely used in medicine, martial arts, and everyday life. Their creation is an extremely complex and labor-intensive process that requires many years of training. Students attend classes for years to master the making of even low-level potions. Martin spends his days training and making magical potions using the skill of immersion. With the help of imperial alchemy, he finally creates a first-level magic potion. Looking around, the boy notices many high-level students at the competition. Martin sees famous students among the participants. One of them is Ronald, whose father belongs to an ancient and powerful dynasty of masters. Martin thought that the unknown stone would not interest anyone, but he forgot about the masters. Superheroes collect rare materials in towers and dungeons. They give these materials to craftsmen who create magical items from them. Only 40 people receive the title of artisan, and the 8 best are called masters. Martin begins to doubt his chances of winning and regrets coming to the competition. George suddenly interrupts Martin's thoughts, ordering him to stop whining, and the boy decides to drink a potion to raise his tone. However, when he tries to drink the potion, he is distracted by a loud voice. Ronald approaches him, noticing that he hasn't seen Martin at such competitions before, and asks what kind of potion he is drinking. Ronald looks at the guy with arrogance in his eyes, and Martin calmly replies that it's just a cure for fatigue. Ronald examines him and concludes that Martin is an ordinary student from a poor family. Ronald says that the requirements for participants need to be tightened and that the talentless and poor need not participate in the competition. Martin, offended by his words, decides to win at any cost. The alchemy competition begins, and George, goading Martin, demands that he show Ronald what he can do. The participants begin to create magical potions, hurrying and fussing, because they only have 2 hours. Ronald is pleased with the organization of the competition, highly appreciating the quality of the ingredients and the equipment provided. But his attention is drawn to Martin, who is standing calmly at the table with ingredients, in no hurry to begin. Martin activates the dive skill, determined to win. Ronald considers him an idiot, believing that speed is important to selecting the best ingredients and creating a potion. He decides to ignore Martin, considering him a loser. At this time, workers are installing complex equipment in the huge guest room. Workers rush to install a gravity control magic circle for enhanced mana concentration. The girl notes that the new student must be very talented, because in ordinary halls they don't install so many magic circles. Lucas informs her that his new student is a former student who was taking a break from the academy. He adds that this student managed to block his unique superhero gaze skill. Lucas is confident that Martin's skills are at least equal to his own, and possibly superior. Looking at his watch, he says that he has an important meeting today. Saying goodbye to the girl, Lucas asks her to supervise the installation work. Meanwhile, Martin, standing in front of the table with ingredients, activates the diving skill. His target is the powerful alchemist Arian. In the Martin novels, Arian was a student of a great alchemist. She wasn't the best, but she had unique skills. Realizing her shortcomings, Arian read 100 magic books a day. Over time, she became the first student of the great alchemist, who shared his invaluable knowledge with her. Arian could create unique potions that gave access to secret skills. Martin slowly drinks the magic potion he received from Arian. A moment later, Martin is absorbed by a powerful air vortex, filling himself with a huge amount of knowledge. His head feels like it's about to burst from this flood of information, and he hears a warning voice telling him that the amount of knowledge is exceeding the permissible limit. Martin temporarily gains knowledge and experience in alchemy, which continues to grow with each passing minute. George watches him, feeling that the energy is different from what he saw during their training in the tower. Martin is under a lot of physical and mental stress as he tries to regain his composure and focus. Soon he returns to reality and looks around. Realizing that time is running out to prepare the magic potion, he hurries to the shelves with ingredients. The guy discovers that the shelves are empty. While he was busy diving, all the ingredients had already been taken. Now Martin sees only poisonous plants and minerals with weak magical power. George's voice is heard advising Martin not to waste time and prepare the poison, which could become a useful potion for fighting monsters. Martin's gaze falls on a dilipia bush that can melt veins if left untreated. The guy decides that even with poisonous ingredients, he can create a first-class potion. Martin takes a bowl and quickly collects the necessary herbs and minerals. He hurries, pours the ingredients onto the table, and throws the bowl aside. While carefully studying the poisonous plants, Martin hears George's voice, warning him to be careful. The main character concentrates mana in his hands and begins magical manipulations. Martin is confident that his potion will outshine the work of other participants. He works carefully, knowing that one drop can destroy 1,000 people. Alchemy Master Ryan watches the participants closely and immediately notices Martin. Ryan sees that most are preparing common recovery potions and simple medicines. Ronald leads the competition by creating a potion with a complex composition and unique effect. Ryan is surprised to notice that Martin works without laboratory machines and complex instruments. This is particularly surprising for Ryan given the tight time frame of the competition. Martin is going to remove the excess poison and transfer the magical substance into purified water. Master Ryan watches as Martin removes the poison by hand. Ryan is amazed. The guy managed to separate the fractions and enhance the effect of the plants without special equipment. Ryan has never seen students use this technology without equipment. Mistakes can increase the poison, so Ryan demands that the competition be stopped immediately. Viewers are delighted with the news of the appearance of a unique class of potion. The host announces that Martin is in first place. Martin met the deadline and created a unique elixir from a limited number of ingredients. Master Ryan does not believe that an ordinary student could cope with such a difficult task. Ronald realizes that victory has eluded him and cannot hide his emotions. The host announces that Martin is the winner of the alchemy competition. Ronald loses his composure and claims that a newbie could not have created a unique potion. He loudly accuses Martin of breaking the rules and cheating. In a fit of anger, Ronald demands that Martin confess to fraud. Master Ryan orders Ronald to stop this unworthy behavior and pull himself together. Ronald instantly becomes quiet and does not dare to contradict his father. Master Ryan is disappointed with his son's behavior and his disgrace. Ronald tries to justify himself by calling Martin a fraud. Master Ryan replies that he can distinguish a fraud from a real alchemist. Ryan demands an immediate apology, and Ronald says goodbye to Martin. The protagonist shows generosity and forgives Ronald without harboring any grudge. Master Ryan thanks Martin for his participation and admires his abilities. He asks who taught Martin the unique techniques for making the elixir. Martin replies that he spent a lot of time on self-study. Master Ryan and his son are amazed that Martin achieved such results on his own. The conversation is interrupted by the host, who invites Martin onto the stage. Ryan considers Martin to be a very promising young man. He supports Ronald, assuring him that he will achieve great success in the future. Ronald promises to work hard to win first place in the next competition. Martin takes the stage and the award ceremony begins. The Lucas Academy teacher is pleased with his new student and presents him with the championship cup. Martin is delighted to receive the trophy from his teacher. The main character and his mentor are sitting on the veranda of a cafe, discussing the past competition. Lucas is amazed by the knowledge Martin has acquired on his own. Martin says his participation in the competition was motivated by the search for the magical mineral bastium. Lucas, unfamiliar with the mineral, admits that Martin constantly surprises him. He asks Martin if he was a member of any guilds before entering the academy. Martin replies that he has not undergone individual training and is not a member of any guild. Lucas is surprised and does not understand why the guy needs bastium, to which Martin reacts emotionally. Lucas studies the mineral but sees nothing special in it, considering it an ordinary stone. Martin insistently asks the teacher to use the superhero gaze skill to reveal bastium's essence. Lucas doesn't take it seriously at first, but Martin manages to convince him. Lucas activates his unique skill to learn more about the mineral. Martin watches closely as the teacher delves into the hidden structures. Lucas increases the flow of mana to penetrate the essence of the mineral. The teacher is amazed. This seemingly ordinary stone is a unique mineral capable of storing, strengthening, and concentrating mana. Martin is pleased that he finally convinced his teacher. Lucas says he will soon give the mineral to one of the masters, and Martin is overjoyed at this news. Lucas suggests that Martin take a break or meet up with friends before the start of training. Martin remembers his old friends from the academy. As he says goodbye, Lucas promises to prepare an individual training program for Martin. Martin, who hasn't spoken to his friends for 2 years, decides to call them. He is looking through his contacts on his phone when he suddenly gets a call from an old friend. Martin's old friend tries to call, but the guy doesn't answer. Suddenly, Martin turns his head and sees that his old friend Khan is nearby. They sit down in a restaurant, remember their time together, and have a good time. Khan is surprised by an unexpected meeting at the cafe. Khan is a leader in the academy, demonstrating outstanding abilities in all disciplines. Martin is proud of his friend, especially his swordsmanship. Khan says there was a stir in their academic group chat when he announced he was having lunch with Martin. Khan announces that Yuna will be joining them soon and is very eager to meet. Martin immediately becomes nervous upon hearing this news. Yuna always supported him at the academy and helped him cope with difficulties. Khan says Yuna was very upset when Martin stopped communicating. He adds that the girl is already very close, just a few blocks away. Suddenly, Martin feels the presence of Everton's energy, typical of curses. He gets a bad feeling and decides to free Yuna from Everton's curse. Martin feels the mana distortion more and more acutely and asks Khan about it. A silhouette of a girl appears in the doorway of the cafe and heads towards their table. Yuna comes up, greets the guys, and says that she is glad to see them. The boys look at her closely, and Martin can clearly feel the impact of Everton's energy. The bright morning sun illuminates the main building of the academy, where classes begin. Martin walks slowly towards the central library, lost in his thoughts. Near the stairs, he notices a group of students discussing the results of the exam. As he passes by, Martin accidentally lightly brushes against one of the students. The guy immediately attacks Martin, accusing him of deliberately hitting him. Suddenly, he delivers a sharp blow, knocking Martin off her feet. Martin didn't expect the attack, loses his balance, and falls with a crash. Suddenly, a loud voice of a girl is heard, outraged by the student's behavior. She demands that he immediately apologize to Martin and think about his behavior. Martin is amazed by her determination and fearlessness. The girl is outraged by the student's meanness, considering it unworthy to discuss a person behind his back and to commit petty dirty tricks. One of the students wants to attack the girl, but his friends manage to hold him back. The girl confidently states that the students will not have the courage to attack her because she is the daughter of the director of the academy. Yuna asks Martin if everything is okay and offers her hand to help him up. Martin slowly gets up and Yuna suggests that they have lunch together. She notices that Martin looks strange and confused. Yuna and Khan are the best students at the academy, and Martin is proud to be friends with them. Martin was often mocked at the academy, but Yuna always came to the rescue in time and put the offenders in their place. Yuna was a disciplinarian, punishing those who offended her during sparring and practical lessons. Martin recalls that he still hasn't thanked the girl for her attitude towards him. Old friends are sitting at a table in a cozy cafe. They are remembering old times. Khan tells the girl that she looks sickly and that she looked better last time. Martin asks the girl if anything strange has happened to her recently. Yuna recalls one unusual incident that happened to her recently. The academy was preparing for a tour of the dungeons, and the girl was asked to help check the route. Yuna enters the new dungeon. She does not notice anything unusual. After some time, Yuna finds an unusual stone in one of the caves. She comes closer and notices a strange spot on its surface as she touches it with her hand. Suddenly, a strange substance comes into contact with Yuna, and she feels a powerful blow of unknown energy. She notices with surprise that the bloody mark on the stone has disappeared without a trace. At this moment, Yuna hears the voices of the professors calling her to return. Without attaching any particular importance to what happened, she quickly walked towards the exit of the cave. The boys are interested in Yuna's story and believe that this incident was not a simple illusion. Martin looks closely at Yuna and notices that her mana is in chaos and heavily distorted. Yuna asks the guys to stop scaring her, assuring her that she recently went to the doctor, and he said that everything is fine. Martin wants to explain to her that she's in danger and offers his help. He asks Yuna for permission to dive into her mana to figure out the situation. Yuna waves it off, assuring that there is nothing to worry about, and suggests changing the subject of the conversation. Despite this, Martin uses the dive skill to penetrate her mana and understand what is going on. Yuna and Khan are surprised because Martin did not have such skills during his studies at the academy. Khan senses the presence of healing light and asks Martin about the state of Yuna's mana. Martin realizes that the girl is under a curse from demon worshippers using demonic power. Martin successfully activates the immersion by taking on the persona of a minor priest he created in one of his novels. For a time, his mana is converted into divine energy, which he plans to use for healing. Martin begins his magical manipulations, confident of success, since the curse has not yet gained full strength. Yuna gives her consent to penetration, and Martin asks her to be patient for a little while. It structures divine energy and directs it to the central energy meridian Yuna. Streams of divine energy envelop Yuna, creating a shining aura around her. The mana-distorting energy disappears, and Khan is amazed by Martin's techniques. Martin replies that he is happy to help old friends who have always supported him. Khan asks how Martin was able to control the healing light, since he didn't have such skills at the academy. He is happy for Martin, who now has awakened powers. Yuna is genuinely happy for Martin, knowing how his lack of skills made his life miserable in the past. She asks when Martin will return to the academy. Martin replies that he has a personal teacher, and Yuna and Khan are curious to know who it is. Martin explains that he cannot yet reveal the identity of his new mentor. He apologizes for the long silence and admits that they are his best friends. Yuna reassures him, saying that the main thing is to see that Martin is doing well, and asks him not to worry. Khan asks Martin to stay in touch in the future and to stay in touch regularly. Martin is incredibly happy to meet his friends after a long separation. A group of old friends spend a fun evening reminiscing about the good times they spent together at the academy. Martin struggles to get home, crosses the threshold of his apartment, and falls to the floor from exhaustion. A message appears on the virtual screen about the reward for removing the curse from Yuna. The reward is information about Everton, which Martin immediately begins to study. Meanwhile, a group of demon worshippers plans a raid on the academy's dungeons. Martin realizes that his friends are in mortal danger and decides to immediately inform his teacher. The virtual screen warns Martin that the demon worshippers may learn of his intentions and change the location of their attack. Martin feels responsible for what is happening, since the demon worshippers are characters from his novels. He is confident that he can help his friends, but he doesn't have a clear plan yet. Martin looks around the huge gym with great interest. His attention is drawn to a workshop where high-tech armor and weapons are made. The guy is impressed by the interiors and equipment of this seemingly unremarkable house. Teacher Lucas asks Martin about his impressions of what he saw. Martin highly appreciates the teacher's quarters, especially the 5th-generation virtual combat system. Martin can't even imagine how much it costs to equip the house with such systems. Lucas explains that he is a successful businessman and intends to recoup his investment. Approaching the table with a small box, Lucas announces that he has a gift for Martin. He throws the box to Martin and says that he has fulfilled his request. Martin opens the package and looks at the contents. Fascinated, the craftsman carefully processed the magical mineral bastium, turning it into a unique amulet. Martin is amazed by the amulet, with which he can change the form of mana. Lucas notes that the craftsman really wanted to buy this mineral from him. Martin tells the teacher that bastium is too valuable a mineral to sell, and that it has already chosen its owner. Lucas stops talking and suggests that they start training immediately. Martin stands in the middle of the room, wondering what courses the master will teach. He thinks that he is most interested in hand-to-hand combat with a spear or the correct use of mana. Suddenly, he is distracted by an incomprehensible sound, and a message appears on the virtual screen about the cessation of air circulation in the room. The floor beneath Martin's feet begins to glow brightly, and he doesn't understand what's happening. In the next room, Lucas watches Martin, wondering where to start training. Lucas states that a real superhero needs practical experience. The mana in the training room is forcibly polluted, enveloping the air and all objects around. A sticky, corrupted energy tries to penetrate Martin, threatening to destroy him. Martin falls to the floor, feeling like he is in a swamp, unable to move. Lucas insists that he hold on, explaining that he needs to get used to the contamination before going underground. This test is designed to reveal Martin's hidden skills. The corrupted energy continues to paralyze his muscles, making it impossible for him to breathe. Lucas is pleased with the way Martin resists, concentrates, and stabilizes his breathing. The dungeons of the magic towers have a unique ecosystem where monsters live. The air in the dungeons has a complex composition, and death in them threatens the absorption of mana in the body. An energetic trail of fear and suffering left by the corrupted dead mana pollutes the dungeon. Martin has been resisting the effects of pollution for 55 minutes now. He remembers that the tower had an automatic cleansing system, and so he had not encountered such energy before. Martin realizes that his persistence is not enough to resist the powerful influence. Lucas sees that Martin's strength is waning and hopes that the boy will soon reveal his hidden skills. But the teacher fails to reveal the secret of Martin, who resists for a long time without using his abilities. Martin realizes he can't take it anymore and declares he intends to use his unique abilities. Lucas hears his words and reacts emotionally. Martin admits he was reluctant to use his skills to try and cope on his own. Lucas asks him why he didn't use them for an hour. Martin laughs out loud as he reveals the teacher's intentions and says that it would have been enough to simply ask about his hidden skills. Lucas is annoyed, reminding that the tower dungeon is no joke. Martin hears George's voice, which points out that without his help, the boy would not have lasted even a minute. George notes that after the superhero test, Martin's mana has improved significantly. Martin feels an unusual lightness in his body. His transformed mana allows him to concentrate an energy ball. Lucas finally gets his way after watching Martin carefully as he uses his unique abilities. Martin plans to cleanse the taint with a cleansing ritual. He's pondering which character from his novels to use for the dive. Targets a minor priest and temporarily converts his mana into divine energy. The skill is successfully activated, and Martin finds himself under the reliable protection of this energy. The junior priest protects Martin, and the sacred energy quickly restores his strength. Lucas is confident that by using this skill, Martin will soon pass out. To his surprise, Martin remains conscious longer than expected. Martin notices the teacher's reaction and asks what surprises him so much. Lucas can't take his eyes off Martin, amazed that he's never seen or heard of anything like this. After 4 hours of struggling, Martin finally became exhausted and lost consciousness. Lucas is proud of his student, believing that his potential exceeds the highest ranks. He begins to doubt that Martin is an ordinary person. When Martin comes to, he asks if he passed the test. Lucas expresses admiration for Martin's masterful use of his skills. The instructor comes down from the observation room and informs Martin that sword training is about to begin. Martin is surprised that Lucas does not give him time to rest and recover. Lucas states that he will train him with all his might using his swordsmanship. Martin, unsure of his fencing skills, asks the instructor to reconsider his decision. Martin says his tough training regimen is paying off. He's in great physical shape and feels good. The Academy's leadership is planning an expedition into the dungeon of the Tower of Light. Martin is confident that the students have nothing to fear, because the squad will have high-level guards and teachers. It trains not only the body, but also the ability to control the flow of mana. His understanding of alchemy also benefits him, allowing him to set up a small business. Using the bank's mobile app, Martin sees that he has made good money selling mid-level magic potions. The protagonist visits a specialty store where he is interested in the artifact storage department. Martin notices swords of extremely rare rank, but realizes that the money he has earned is not enough to buy them. With the money from selling potions, he buys high-quality equipment and weapons. Martin reflects on his life as a superhero. It is hard and dangerous, but also brings many joyful moments. Suddenly, the phone rings from Lucas, which alarms Martin, since the teacher usually does not call at this time. Martin answers, and Lucas says he will be gone for a while as he plans to go underground. The association asks teacher Lucas to do a favor by sending him to the dungeon as the chief manager. Martin expresses a strong desire to join the expedition. Lucas refuses, warning that the dungeon is very dangerous, but Martin stubbornly asks to take him with him. Martin reminds that he is no longer a student at the academy, so he cannot visit the dungeon under the standard rules. Lucas, deciding that the experience will be beneficial, agrees to take Martin with him, but on the condition that he will not leave the teacher's side for a single step. Martin is pleased, but Lucas sternly reminds him that this will be serious training, not entertainment. Martin chats with Yuna in the study chat, and she is surprised to learn that he will be on the dungeon tour. They continue to communicate, looking forward to tomorrow. Suddenly, the voice of the demon worshipper is heard, asking whether the girl has fallen into a trap. The mysterious demon worshipper reminds us of the importance of the upcoming operation. A man in a robe approaches the magic circle, and the leader of the ritual asks if everything is ready. The demon worshipper claims that he has prepared the seeds and will activate them when people relax their vigilance. The ritual leader warns the stranger that if he fails the task, he will pay with his life. The demon worshippers begin their hellish ritual, their ominous prayer sounds. Morning comes and Martin comes to the meeting place. He was so eager to get into the dungeon that he arrived before the appointed time. Suddenly a touch distracts him from his deep thoughts. Martin turns around abruptly and sees Emma in front of him, who is in a great mood. Martin greets Emma and asks what she is doing here. Their conversation is interrupted by the approach of Yuna and Khan, who happily greet everyone. Khan is surprised that Martin ended up on the tour, since only full-time students are allowed to do so. Martin explains that this is the decision of his individual teacher, which surprises his friends. Suddenly, Emma notices a man approaching and cannot take her eyes off him. A teacher named Lucas, well known and respected among the students, approaches the students. Martin's friends are delighted to learn that Lucas himself will be accompanying them. Martin tries to hide the fact that Lucas is his new teacher, not wanting to attract unnecessary attention to himself. He is under a lot of stress and does not want to be the center of attention. Lucas is puzzled by Martin's reaction. not understanding why he's pretending not to know him. Finally, Martin invites his friends to meet their new teacher. Emma can't contain her delight when she learns that her friend is studying with a legendary teacher. Khan is surprised that Martin hid the name of his teacher. The tour group enters an area known as the Night of Screams, and the students and faculty begin to feel the overwhelming effects of contaminated energy. Khan notes that this dungeon is very different from the one Yuna described. Yuna senses something is wrong and is going to tell the professors. The group moves deeper into the area and the students begin to discuss the difficulty of the dungeon. Emma confesses to Martin that she is becoming very scared and suggests that they stick together. The excursion group includes Jacob, who still cannot come to terms with the fact that Martin has become a student of the great teacher. Jacob keeps a close eye on Martin and his friends, feeling a fierce hatred towards the main character. Martin tries to remember which of his novels had an area called Night of Screams. Suddenly, a terrible roar is heard which makes the blood run cold and Martin is overcome with horror. He senses strange creatures approaching the group. The group begins to notice them, and Lucas orders them to remain calm and stick together. The students form a tight magic circle, hearing the eerie voices of creatures eager to devour their internal organs. Martin understands that time is short and frantically tries to remember the chapter of his novel where these strange creatures were described. The teachers draw their swords, preparing to repel the attack of the vile creatures. Suddenly, Martin remembers the chapter in question and demands that the teachers stop immediately. Lucas looks closely at Martin, trying to understand why he is trying to prevent the attack. Martin explains to the teacher that under no circumstances should these creatures be attacked. He says that the vile creatures are a special kind of evil spirits. Martin assures that despite their creepy appearance, these spirits will not cause harm. Evil spirits are attracted by the warmth of people and the beating of their hearts. They surround students and teachers but do not dare to attack. Lucas asks Martin how he can be so sure that evil spirits won't attack. Martin replies that if these spirits are attacked, all the dead in the forest will rise and haunt them until their death. He explains to the teacher that he learned about this from ancient magic books. Martin tries to stop one of the teachers who is not going to listen to a simple student. Lucas activates his superhero gaze skill and sees that Martin is telling the truth. Lucas suggests that the teachers not attack first, but build a defense and watch for evil spirits. The students are shocked by Lucas's decision and don't want to just stand there waiting for the spirits to tear them apart. Jacob expresses dissatisfaction with Lucas's decision, doubting its adequacy. Lucas calmly replies that Jacob will be able to give instructions when he becomes a senior teacher. He urges the students to calm down, assuring them that his decision is based on experience. The head of the swordsmanship department stands up for Jacob, stating that the students' safety is at stake. Meanwhile, evil creatures are closely watching the dispute between students and teachers. The head of the swordsmanship department believes that there is no logic in Martin's words and suggests that the boy is acting under the influence of fear. Martin insists that he is not acting out of fear and gives his reasons. He explains to the students that if the monsters are relieved of their grudge, the dungeon can be cleared without bloodshed. The head of the department considers Martin a naive boy and does not believe a single word he says. Lucas calls for everyone to calm down, reminding them that they did not come into the dungeon for senseless bloodshed. He insists that the monsters cannot be attacked and suggests looking for an alternative solution. Martin is glad that he was finally able to convince the teachers not to attack the mysterious monsters. The head of the sword department refuses to continue the conversation, stating that he will stick to his opinion. The head of the sword department believes that negotiating with monsters is a stupid idea and decides to resort to proven methods. He launches a lightning attack on surrounding monsters. Martin notices the attack and tries to stop it before it's too late. The head of the department delivers a series of sharp blows to the motionless monsters. Martin is overcome with anxiety, realizing what terrible consequences could follow. Defeated monsters disappear, leaving behind a trail of dark energy. The head of the sword department states that he will not allow the students to be harmed. Martin is very upset, realizing that he had to stop the teacher at any cost. Lucas is unhappy with the actions of the head of the department and states that he is responsible for the current situation. Jacob argues that in the dungeon, one must suspect everyone and be wary of other people's words. Lucas insists that it is unacceptable to ignore orders and act independently. Martin realizes that there is no more time for talking. He feels the difficulty level in the dungeon increase dramatically. The monsters begin to move and make terrible screams. Their state changes. The students don't understand why Lucas wanted to avoid a fight. One of the girls notices that the surrounding fog has become thicker and closer to them. Lucas asks Martin if he has any thoughts on the brewing problem. Martin replies that it is too late. The dungeon monsters have begun their transformation. The monsters of the dungeon are determined to avenge their murdered comrades. They intend to destroy the aliens who disturb their peace, and all the souls of the forest begin to transform into more dangerous evil spirits. The students did not expect that an ordinary excursion would turn into a deadly adventure. The monsters of the dungeon have transformed into more powerful evil spirits and are getting closer and closer to people. Now, at a higher level, they pose a serious threat. Jacob, seized by wild horror, begins to scream, losing control of himself. Suddenly, the head of the sword department falls to his knees, having been hit by a powerful energy attack from the monsters. The head of the sword department begins to choke and tries to call for help, but can only make loud wheezing sounds. Lucas calls Emma over and asks her to take the department head to a safe distance. He believes that the creatures have turned into evil spirits and insists on the need to engage in battle. Martin warns that this won't work and asks to be allowed to handle things on his own. He assures Lucas that he knows this dungeon well and asks him to trust him. Lucas, seeing that the spirits have already begun to attack, agrees that urgent action is needed. Martin explains that any attempts at physical influence are useless and only strengthen the monsters, making them more dangerous. Emma tries to take the head of the sword department to a safe distance. Khan is surrounded by evil spirits and the students are desperate to help him. Martin realizes that his moment has come. He must save his friends. Lucas decides to trust Martin and lets him act on his own. The teacher gives him a ring of illusion, which changes the wearer's appearance when using mana. Despite his confidence in Martin's strength, Lucas is deeply worried about him. Martin is grateful to the teacher for his care. Despite the growing evil spirits, he is determined to successfully complete the mission. These monsters were once ordinary children. Their parents abandoned them, and they died during the Great War. Many of them died alone, suffering from poverty and hardship. Their souls found their final resting place in the dungeon of the Sword Tower. Martin understands that violence is not the answer. He believes that children's souls need peace. Martin performs a dive on a temple servant named Michelle. Michelle, having received a revelation from the source of light, saved many souls full of resentment. Martin used to dive into low-level priests, but Michelle is a high-ranking priestess. He hears a voice asking who he is and where he came from. Suddenly, Prina, a demigod angel, appears, connecting people with the source of light. George is surprised by her appearance. The owner of the tower does not understand what she is doing here. Prina recites a prayer to the light source, facilitating Martin's descent. Martin successfully dives into a medium difficulty character, and the Ring of Illusion creates an image of Michelle. He is in perfect sync with the hero of his novel, filling the space around him with divine energy. Lucas is in awe of his student's level of magic, sensing the presence of the light source. The teacher remembers the classroom and realizes that this was the secret skill that Martin was hiding. Martin, in the form of the priestess Michelle, hovers over the battlefield, generating more and more divine energy. The evil spirits begin to retreat, and the students notice that this is caused by a golden rain falling from the sky. Priestess Michelle seeks to bring peace to the evil spirits of the dungeon. Emma looks up at the sky, trying to figure out where this magical priestess came from. The golden rain intensifies, and Michelle's voice says that the children became evil spirits through no fault of their own. In Martin's novel, the souls of the dead children were annihilated, but in reality, things happen differently. The souls of children catch the drops of golden rain and begin to cry. With divine energy, they find peace and tranquility. One by one, the spirits disappear, leaving only torn clothes. Martin hears a voice saying that the Night of Scream's location has been cleared. Exhausted, Martin loses consciousness and falls to the ground. He has exceeded his limits. Lucas notices that Martin used a huge amount of mana in a short time. Using such powerful divine energy always comes with side effects. Lucas gives the order to immediately send Martin to the hospital and requests the best means for his recovery. Suddenly, the tour group is attacked by dark energy. Huge black tentacles rush towards them. Lucas notices the threat in time, but does not understand who is behind the attack. A squad of demon worshippers slowly emerges from the darkness, chanting magic spells. The elder demon worshipper promises to spare everyone if the 8th hero is given to him. Lucas orders the students to protect Martin while he fights the attackers. The leader of the demon worshippers threatens to destroy everyone if his demands are not met. Martin struggles to resist the dark energy trying to penetrate his mind. He regains consciousness and hears a voice, but cannot make out the words. Still weakened, Martin focuses his gaze and sees his teacher in front of him. Lucas asks how he feels after 3 days of sleep. Martin says there is no need to worry about him, but he is worried about the fate of the dungeon. Lucas replies that some saint came and sorted everything out. The teacher praises Martin, believing that he performed well in the battle. Lucas warns Martin that careless use of his abilities could lead to premature death. Then the teacher announces that he has bad news. Martin asks anxiously what happened, thinking that something happened to his friends. Lucas admits that he didn't know that Martin's parents weren't aware of his expulsion from the academy and accidentally told them about it. Martin was very upset. He didn't want his parents to know that he dropped out of school. Martin's parents live in a cozy house in a small village on the outskirts of the country. Martin has not visited his parents for over 2 years, and now he does not dare open the door and enter the house. He recalls how touching and emotional the farewell moments were before his departure to the academy. Martin's mother is overjoyed to see her son, while his father looks at him with displeasure. Mom calls Martin to wash his hands and sit at the table. For Martin, there is no better food than what his mother cooked. She is pleased that he has a great appetite and offers him dessert. The father coldly informs him that he knows that Martin did not extend his academic leave and left the academy. To Martin's surprise, his father supports his desire to explore dungeons and become a superhero. Mom says that 2 months ago, a new dungeon appeared next to their house. Martin is surprised because exactly 2 months ago, his stories disappeared from the computer. He begins to suspect that the appearance of the new tower is connected to the disappearance of the files. Martin goes into the forest near his parents' house to find the entrance to a magical dungeon. It increases mana and applies detection skill. The guy receives a huge amount of information. The radiation radius of the new dungeon exceeds 1 kilometer. Martin finds the entrance to a magical dungeon and is struck by its ominous appearance, completely inappropriate for a low-level place. Meanwhile, the forensic department of the Superhero Association is located in the business district of a large city. A pathologist takes the body of an unknown man out of the refrigerator. Lucas and the pathologist carefully examine the body. Lucas has no information about the man other than the mark on his chest. He remembers the words of the leader of the demon worshippers about the 8th superhero. George watches Martin and wonders why he is hesitating to enter a low-difficulty dungeon. Martin wonders whether he should warn the association about the new dungeon. Suddenly, he clearly hears the voice of the hero of his novel, used for immersion. Previously, Martin thought that he was only able to communicate telepathically with George. Martin decides not to tell the association about the dungeon, intending to deal with it himself. A loud ringing sound wakes him up, but he doesn't want to wake up and ignores it. Martin puts his phone on silent and tries to go back to sleep. Suddenly, he jumps out of bed, not understanding how he ended up there. The last thing he remembers is entering a new dungeon. Martin looks around his desk filled with spreadsheets and term papers, realizing he's stepped back in time. The path of choice location in the new dungeon has the ability to move in time. Now he is on the training ground of the academy where he studied 2 years ago. Moving to the university building, Martin stands on the balcony and watches the fight between 2 guys. He sees one of the fighters fall from the balcony onto the first floor. A strong burst of energy disorients him for a few seconds. Martin realizes that he is observing himself, which deeply impresses him. Jacob calls Martin a worthless weakling who is incapable of anything. Martin is deeply upset, remembering how he once gave in and stopped resisting. He tries to understand why the magical dungeon is showing him this painful moment again. Jacob's friends continue to insult and ridicule Martin, increasing his feelings of helplessness. Jacob's friends say they deserve a reward for beating up the worthless parasite. Martin hears a voice reminding him of his numerous absences and failing grades. He recalls thinking that studying at the academy would be a cakewalk. The voice states that the dungeon has recognized his fear and is mimicking the image of a person he feared in the past. Jacob mockingly says that it is a great honor for him to compete against the student who did best on the written exam. The new dungeon accurately recreates a life scene from the past. Martin realizes that he has become stronger and more experienced, but doubts his ability to defeat the best student in the academy. The dark energy of fear envelops the hero. Martin tries to calm down, realizing that this is just an illusion of the dungeon. He is confident of victory because he has become much stronger. Jacob rushes at him, raising his huge sword to strike. Martin blocks the shot with difficulty, amazed by Jacob's skill. Jacob is surprised. The guy has never demonstrated such skill before. Martin taunts his opponent, calling him stupid for landing a predictable blow to the head. He decides it's time to teach the enemy a lesson and tries to activate the dive skill. But the skill doesn't work, and the second attempt also fails. Martin hears a voice telling him that using the dive skill is prohibited. Jacob takes advantage of the situation immediately, delivering a powerful kick. Martin is unable to block it. The guy flies to the side, hitting the stair railing. Jacob uses his signature move, the tornado. This is followed by a successful strike called the Cobra Throw. Jacob calls Martin a non-entity and a parasite, unworthy of the academy. He sarcastically says that Martin's place is in the city garbage dump, not among the students. George doesn't understand what's going on. Martin doesn't look like himself at all. He is outraged that Martin allowed this disgusting guy to beat him up. Jacob continues to strike, and Martin begins to realize his helplessness without his unique skill. George says he is ashamed of Martin, not expecting him to give in so quickly. The voice of George, the owner of the tower, is heard demanding to see the one who escaped death in his domain. George is surprised by Martin's behavior, suspecting that it is part of a cunning plan. Martin reflects on how he spent his life adapting and hating himself for it. So he created the character of George, unbending and invincible. With thoughts of always wanting to be like George, Martin tries to get up. Jacob is shocked, expecting Martin to beg for mercy rather than rise to his feet. Martin calmly informs the enemy that he needs to wait. It will all be over soon. Jacob is perplexed, deciding that Martin has gone crazy. He plans to practice a couple of new techniques on the hero. Jacob takes a powerful punch, not expecting Martin's furious counterattack. Martin not only recovers, but also concentrates enough energy to defend himself. George is pleased. Martin surprised him again. Martin feels like he's finally on the right path. He's conquered his fear. Jacob, overcome with uncontrollable rage, unleashes a stream of insults on the guy. Jacob prepares to attack and states that Martin will beg for mercy. Martin loses sight of the enemy. Jacob uses a fast-running technique. Jacob moves quickly around, throwing punches that Martin is unable to block. The force of the blows is so great that Martin is thrown several meters towards the railing of the stairs. Jacob enjoys his advantage, realizing that Martin's skills are not enough to counter his attacks. Martin cannot understand where the enemy is at this moment. Jacob sneaks up behind him, preparing to deliver his signature move, taking advantage of the fact that Martin can't see him. But Martin uses his academic detection skill and manages to repel the attack. Jacob is thrown back, shocked that his skill didn't work against such a seemingly weak opponent. An enraged Jacob screams and launches another attack on Martin. The protagonist realizes that he is no longer the weak and frightened guy he was 2 years ago. Time slows down and Martin watches as his opponent slowly approaches. Martin easily parries the blow, feeling the high-level energy within him that overwhelms Jacob. Martin deftly delivers a powerful chopping blow, finally defeating his longtime enemy. Jacob screams in despair and falls to the floor, overwhelmed by Martin's power. Martin looks closely at his defeated opponent, realizing that he has defeated not only Jacob, but also his own fear. Jacob is shocked, not understanding where Martin got such enormous power from. Martin calmly reveals that his secret is a lack of fear. Martin stands at the bus stop with his parents, who are seeing him off. He is glad that he managed to visit his parents and clear the new dungeon. Returning to the city, the parents say goodbye to him, hoping that their son will come more often. For successfully completing the dungeon, Martin is rewarded with his lost novel. He plunges into reading his past works with great interest. Yuna comes up to him and, noticing, asks why he is looking at the black screen of his laptop. Martin is surprised by Yuna's appearance and asks what she is doing here. Yuna replies that she dropped out of the academy to begin private training. Martin does not approve of her decision to drop out of the academy. The conversation is interrupted when Khan walks in and greets them. Yuna is happy that they can now study together and become superheroes one day. She tells Martin that the teacher has given her permission to use the rooms for training. Martin corrects her, reminding her that Lucas prefers to be called a master rather than a teacher. Martin asks the guys where Master Lucas is now. Meanwhile, Lucas is sitting in his office when he is informed that the spy who was drawing the magic circle has been caught. Lucas is surprised that the number of demon worshippers is growing, and they have become more active. Too many magic circles appear in the city, and Lucas realizes that this is not just a small cult that can be ignored. He remembers that on the body of the destroyed demon worshipper was the same symbol as on the magic circles throughout the city. Lucas realizes that after the 7 new towers appear, more and more people are getting involved with the devil. Martin, meanwhile, heads to the artifact shop, intending to spend some of the money he earned from selling the potion. Martin is stopped by a stranger who suddenly calls him by name. The stranger congratulates him on the awakening of his magical abilities. He hands Martin a business card offering him a job in the analytics department. The stranger's name is Chan. He is the head of the recruitment department of the Heavenly Palace Guild. Mr. Chan informs Martin that he knows about his quest to obtain a superhero license. Martin replies that he needs time to think about the proposal. George's voice is heard wondering why Mr. Chan is so eager to hire Martin. Mr. Chan is upset. He used all his unique skills to scan Martin, but to no avail. He is irritated that he couldn't even determine the basic characteristics of Martin's mana. He is disturbed by the energy emanating from Martin, which resembles the power of the 7 great superheroes. Mr. Chan decides not to give up and to get as close to Martin as possible in the future, despite the difficulties. Martin finds himself in a shopping mall where he senses the presence of Everton's evil energy. He wants to find out what the demon worshippers are up to and prepares to use the detection skill. With the increase in mana, Martin's detection skill has become more effective, and he can now sense magical vibrations from a considerable distance away. Methodically, floor by floor, Martin scans the mall. After some time, he finds a demon worshipper's magic circle hidden in a fire shield. Martin immediately realizes that this is the mark of demon worshippers, and immediately hears George's voice asking how he knows this. Martin knows from his stories that a magic circle can only be destroyed with holy water. Luckily, he has a magic bracelet that teleports the necessary items. Priestess Michelle taught him how to make holy water without immersion. Martin sprinkles the circle with holy water, and it instantly disappears. The guy decides to do a deeper scan to make sure there are no other magic circles nearby. Using his mana to heighten his senses, Martin detects numerous magic circles nearby. He is shocked by how many signs the demon worshippers have managed to install. The demon worshippers learn that Martin is destroying their magic circles and decide to stop him. The cult leader suggests eliminating the 8th hero before it's too late. They remember how easily Martin destroyed the first seed using divine power. Ordinary ministers admit that they have not yet been able to even get close to him. However, one of the demon worshippers claims that he has a cunning plan and is going to deal with Martin soon. This minister is confident that the guy will not be able to destroy all the magic circles alone. However, the cult leader orders not to relax because the evil seed is under threat. Martin realizes that he urgently needs to find and destroy all the evil seeds. To summon a demon, you need magic circles and a curse seed. If the seeds are sown in a person, the body will turn into a demon. Martin realizes that he cannot cope with this task alone and decides to turn to a master for help. Suddenly, he feels a familiar vibration of energy and looks away from his phone, looking at the entrance to the coffee shop. He notices his old friend Emma, who greets him happily. Martin asks her how she knew he was here. Emma replies that she was just passing by and noticed him through the window. Suddenly, Martin senses a change in Emma's mana and attempts a deep scan. He suspects that the girl has been subjected to an evil influence and bears a curse similar to the one that Yuna had. Martin asks Emma to give him her hand so he can perform a more precise scan. She extends her hand and is slowly enveloped by the divine energy emanating from Martin. Suddenly, Emma screams loudly and abruptly pulls her hand away. Unable to withstand the impact of divine energy, Martin is very alarmed by her reaction to the divine energy. Martin discovers an evil seed implanted in Emma's body by demon worshippers. He realizes that the seed hasn't attached to Emma's mana core yet, so he has some time. Martin suggests that the infection occurred during an excursion into the dungeon. Deciding to remove the seed immediately before it begins to turn Emma into a demon, Martin asks her to be patient for a little while. He begins to concentrate the divine energy, preparing to expel the seed. Emma, not understanding what is happening, anxiously asks Martin what he is going to do. Martin feels that he has concentrated enough divine energy and prepares to perform the dive. At this moment, a mysterious stranger appears in the room, declaring that his efforts are in vain. Martin is distracted and turns around, studying the stranger carefully. Suddenly, there is a powerful explosion. The shockwave shatters the glass display cases of the cafeteria. Glass shards fly all over the room, injuring visitors. George's voice is heard asking Martin if he is okay. A demon stands in the middle of the room, noticing with displeasure that Martin is once again interfering with the plans of the demon worshippers. The demon declares that it is time for Martin to die and raises his huge paw to strike. The demon's paw approaches quickly, and Martin is amazed by its speed. Master Lucas suddenly appears, blocking the fatal blow. Martin is pleased with his rescue and impressed by his teacher's strength and speed. Lucas sends a curse towards the demon, declaring that no one dares touch his student. Martin asks how the teacher got there, and Lucas explains that he sensed an imbalance of energy. Lucas tells Martin to hide in a safe place while he deals with the demon himself. The demon watches Master Lucas and Martin closely, emitting a quiet, sinister laugh. The hellish creature states that his task has become more difficult. Now he will have to destroy not only Martin, but also his teacher. Master Lucas realizes that the fight will be difficult, as he is facing a high-level demon. Apostle Amel decides to introduce himself. Declaring himself a servant of Satan, Lucas, unimpressed, calls him just a crazy fanatic. Apostle Amol indignantly asks not to compare him with ordinary priests of the cult of evil. Martin senses demon-worshipping magic circles beginning to activate throughout the city. Master Lucas also notices changes in the energy balance. Martin is worried that he did not have time to deactivate all the seeds of evil. Suddenly, he realizes that Emma, who was nearby, has disappeared without a trace. Martin looks around, but does not see her and does not understand where she could have disappeared to. Meanwhile, dark energy envelops Emma, trapping her in a massive energy cocoon. Apostle Amel says with a grin that demons feed on human fear. He adds that Martin can't even imagine how delicious this fear is. More than 1,000 demon worshippers' magical signs were activated throughout the city. A little boy notices streams of evil energy rising into the sky and asks his mother what is happening. Passers-by stop, watching with interest as the city is enveloped in meridians of dark energy. The city gradually plunges into darkness, covered by a dome of dark energy. One of the passers-by points to the sky where a huge portal is visible. Infected energy begins to envelop people, penetrating their unprotected souls. Those whose mana is weak are subject to terrible transformations. A huge portal in the sky begins to suck in the transformed souls of people. Martin realizes that if Emma's body begins to absorb transformed souls, she will turn into a demon. He realizes that he must immediately destroy the seed in her body. Apostle Amel states that no one can stop the process that has already begun. He warns that a demon with great power will soon come into the world. Master Lucas demands that the demon shut up, believing that he is simply bluffing. Amel replies with a grin that the master must prepare for a quick and painful death. With a loud roar, Amel launches a furious attack on Lucas. The master parries his blow and blocks the demon's huge claw. Lucas creates a powerful energy vortex around himself, knocking Amel aside. Martin decides to take advantage of the moment to get close to Emma and remove the hellish seed. He begins to feel a disgusting smell filling the entire space around him. Martin hears loud footsteps coming from the dark energy cocoon next to him. A disgusting demon appears before him, and the air is filled with the smell of rotting bodies. Martin realizes with horror that the demon's appearance exactly matches the description from his novel. He is upset, realizing that he did not have time to save Emma. She turned into a demon. The demon that has taken over Emma's body stands motionless and stares at Martin. In desperation, Martin asks if Emma is still conscious and if she recognizes him. For a moment, it seems to him that the girl answered in the affirmative. But then the demon's voice is heard asking who he is. Martin recognizes with horror the metallic voice he described in his novel. In his story, there was no way to save a man who had been transformed into a demon. Realizing that the demon can destroy many people, Martin decides to destroy the creature that has taken over Emma's body. Martin painfully makes his decision and prepares to make the dive. The demon senses a change in the energy balance and realizes that Martin is a threat. Martin dives in, using the divine power of the priestess Michelle to exorcise the demon. The demon begins to disintegrate under the influence of divine power and the magical prayer of the priestess. The magical spell spreads throughout the demon's body, tearing it apart from the inside. Martin realizes that destroying the demon will lead to Emma's death and bitterly asks her for forgiveness. Martin worries that despite the powerful influence of divine energy, the demon is still alive. The demon looks at him with hatred and demands an explanation of what he did to him. Suddenly, the demon jumps high into the air and moves quickly towards Martin, intending to destroy him. Time slows down, and Martin sees the demon's paw approaching. Realizing that the divine curse has not worked, Master Lucas notices a large explosion behind him and wonders worriedly where his students are. Looking around, he can't find either Emma or Martin. Apostle Amel is offended that Master Lucas turns away from him during the fight and demands that he return to the duel immediately. Lucas attacks the Apostle Amel with determination, seeking to quickly end the fight and get to his disciples. Meanwhile, the demon that has taken over Emma's body approaches the lying Martin. Martin is overcome with anger towards himself. He did everything he could, but did not achieve the desired result. In the sky, a huge portal continues to absorb the transformed souls of people. Martin bitterly reflects that his biggest mistake was writing his novel. He is tormented by the fact that he was unable to help Emma in time, and in despair he hopes for a miracle, asking her to return. Lucas looks closely at the demon and senses that despite the transformation, Emma's soul is not completely destroyed. Martin realizes that despite the pain and fear, Emma continues to fight. Emma is trapped in a massive energy cocoon, making it increasingly difficult for her to breathe. Emma doesn't know where she is. The last thing she remembers is being attacked by a stranger in a cafe. She tries to remember what happened after the attack, but all efforts are in vain. Her thoughts are interrupted by loud sounds, the cries of people calling for help. Emma sees a large number of captive people locked in huge glass cages who are loudly calling for help. She wants to help the captives and tries to answer them, but finds that she cannot speak. Emma watches in horror as a huge, ugly claw approaches the cages. The claw grabs defenseless people who scream and desperately try to escape. Emma decides to use her unique Ice World skill to stop the claw. The ice transforms into huge columns stretching high into the air. But a sudden blow paralyzes her, interrupting the magic. Emma feels like she's falling into an endless funnel, falling lower and lower. When she wakes up, she discovers a huge wound on her back from a powerful energy blow. Emma frantically tries to put her thoughts in order. She urgently needs to help the unfortunate captives. A huge biomechanical claw approaches her, but Emma has almost no strength left to resist. Suddenly, some unknown force repels the claw's attack, and Emma does not understand how this happened. She sees the silhouette of a man in front of her and hears a familiar voice begging her to come back. It is Martin's voice. He insistently asks her to resist. Emma, with effort, stretches out her hand towards him. She feels intense pain and fear, unable to contain her emotions, and tears flow down her face. Emma says it's cold and scary here, and there are a lot of captive people nearby that she can't help alone. Although her soul should have been destroyed after turning into a demon, Emma is still conscious. Captive souls of people experience unbearable suffering and pray for help. Martin looks back on his novel, realizing that nothing like that happened in his book. Suddenly, Martin realizes why Emma's soul remains steadfast. He remembers that he gave her a piece of divine energy in the cafe. This particle remained in her body, and Martin's constant blows to the demon awaken Emma's consciousness. Martin gets a chance to save her. He decides to immerse himself in the image of the exorcist Michael from his novel. But the attempt is unsuccessful. There is not enough mana. The demon rejoices at his failure, mocking him and calling Martin a loser. Martin is overcome with anger. At the most important moments, he finds himself powerless. Suddenly, one of the 7 superheroes gives him his magical power. With his mana restored, Martin begins the process of immersing himself in Exorcist Michael. A loud prayer is recited, calling upon the evil spirit to submit in the name of the Lord and leave the girl's body. A concentrated beam of divine energy penetrates the demon's body. The demon lets out an inhuman scream, and clots of dark energy begin to gush from the wound on his chest. These clots take the form of a huge film strip. Martin realizes that the film contains memories from Emma's past life, which begin to consume him. He finds himself in a soul dungeon located in Emma's consciousness. The silence is broken by a barely audible moan from a girl coming from around the corner. Martin follows the sound and soon finds Emma, who is trapped in giant claws. He screams, demanding that she wake up immediately. Emma regains consciousness, but is too exhausted to resist. The claw begins to lift Emma into the portal, and Martin reaches out to her, begging her to grab his hand. With the last of her strength, Emma extends her hand, and Martin runs up to make the jump. He manages to jump up to her and grab her hand, transferring particles of divine energy into her body. Emma feels a huge surge of divine power. Her consciousness begins to free itself from the magical influence of demons. She throws off the spell and emerges from the demonic body. The demon screams hysterically, cursing Martin and promising merciless revenge. Emma is completely freed, loses consciousness, and falls senseless to the ground. Martin is extremely happy that his plan worked. The captured souls return to human bodies. He runs up to Emma, checks her pulse, and breathes a sigh of relief. She's alive. While Martin was taking care of Emma, the demon transformed into a huge, ugly ball. The demon approaches, demanding that his body be returned to him immediately. With its mouth open and a loud roar, the hellish creature rushes at Martin. Suddenly, a bright light blinds him, and a powerful explosion blows the demon into pieces. Martin wakes up after the explosion, trying to figure out who saved him. He realizes that Yuna has come to his aid, asking if he is okay. Yuna is glad that she made it on time, and Martin thanks her from the bottom of his heart. Martin asks Yuna how she was able to find him here. Yuna explains that she noticed the souls of people gathering and ran after them. Noticing Emma lying unconscious, Yuna asks what happened to her. Martin sees the demon recovering and sneaking up on Yuna, and shouts to warn her. Yuna suddenly turns around and uses her division skill to send out an energy beam, cutting the demon in half. She admits that for a moment she was scared and lost control of the situation. However, the demon quickly recovers, and Yuna wonders why he doesn't die. Martin explains that the monster regenerates using mana, and to defeat it, you need a power that exceeds its recovery rate. Meanwhile, Lucas continues to battle Satan's apostle Amal. A demon crawls up to Amal, loudly clicking its teeth, and demands a new body. Amal angrily calls the demon a stupid animal and orders him to get out of the way and not interfere with the battle. However, Lucas sees the demon suddenly pounce on Amal and devour him. The demon begins to rapidly change shape, and Lucas is surprised by the speed of the transformation. In just a few minutes, the demon turns into a huge 20-meter ugly monster. Lucas doesn't stand on ceremony for long and transforms his mana into lightning inherited from the god of thunder. The demon scoffs, stating that Lucas can only use his lightning to intimidate the students. But Lucas, by changing the mana, generates a lightning spear, and directs it at the demon. Martin watches his teacher's battle closely, admiring his skill. However, the huge demon absorbs the energy of the lightning spear, becoming only stronger. The demon mockingly states that he enjoys Master Lucas's nourishing mana, and in addition to it, he intends to absorb the bodies of his opponents. Lucas notices that the demon's body is becoming unstable and is beginning to self-destruct. Martin realizes that the Master's power has had an effect and decides to strengthen the blow by adding explosive mana. He calls Yuna and asks her to use her most powerful fire spell. Martin hopes that their joint plan will destroy the demon and asks Yuna to attack at his command. Yuna begins the ritual of the Great Fire. A fiery pentagram appears around her. Martin warns her not to rush and wait for the signal. Yuna is ready to attack, awaiting Martin's command, who dives into the exorcist Michael. Martin activates a power harmony skill that is optimal for use with the remnants of divine power. This skill is extremely dangerous, and Martin realizes that he could die after using it. When the moment comes, Martin gives the command to Yuna to attack. Yuna tells Martin that she is ready to attack and asks Master Lucas to step aside. Lucas is surprised by the magical rituals of his students, but obediently moves away. Yuna unleashes a powerful stream of sacred fire on the demon, causing the monster to scream hysterically. At the same time, Martin directs a stream of divine energy at the demon, reinforced by the cleansing prayer of the exorcist Michael. The lighting ritual occurs, and Yuna is amazed, having never seen such a skill in action before. The hellish monster's wild roar fills the space as it is engulfed by a massive pillar of divine fire. Lucas is pleased with the result. The seed of the curse is cleansed and the demon's mind is destroyed. However, he remembers that Martin has poor control over his mana and worries that the student may have overdone it. The master hurries to find Martin to help him. Suddenly, Martin appears in front of him, asking how he can help. Lucas runs up, surprised to see Martin is completely okay, and asks if he is hurt. But after a moment, Martin begins to feel ill, not understanding what is happening to him. Lucas and Yuna are alarmed and surprised by his transformation. George, who was watching the battle, is amazed that Martin was able to combine mana and divine power. Previously, George had only seen this technique used by the demigod angel Prina. He couldn't even imagine that Martin was capable of turning a demon back into a human. George is sure that Martin will soon die because he used a force beyond his capabilities. George says goodbye to Martin, considering him a good person. Suddenly, he jumps up from his throne, seeing that Martin is alive and well, although the guy himself does not understand how this happened. George approaches the demigod angel Prina, asking why she saved Martin. Prina replies that she sees Martin as a promising student and besides, she likes him. George takes Prina's words with reserve and suggests testing Martin on the second floor of the tower. Prina reminds that Martin passed the first, impassable level. Demigod angel Prina calls Martin a very capable and gifted student. George ponders Martin's future. He decides to invite Martin to the second floor of the magic tower. Meanwhile, the boy finds a piece of burnt bread and happily tells his sister that they will have lunch today. The children share the bread, happily rejoicing that they will not go to bed hungry. Suddenly, a bright light illuminates the space, frightening them, and they scream loudly. The children are amazed to see a young man appear from this bright flash of light. Martin looks around in surprise, not understanding where he is. He finds himself in a poor neighborhood of a lost village in the mountains. The virtual screen informs that Martin is invited to the second floor of the tower, in a location called the Ghetto. The children, frightened by his sudden appearance, ask who he is and what he is doing here. Martin recognizes the boy as Jack, a character he created in one of his novels. Jack, deciding that Martin is a wizard, tries to start a conversation and offers him water. Martin gratefully accepts the water, feeling very thirsty. Martin gets slightly poisoned because the flask contained fermented moss tea, which he did not like. Realizing that the children are very hungry, he uses a magic bracelet to teleport food. Hungry children, burning their hands, greedily pounce on the offered food. Martin looks at a piece of burnt bread and understands that the life of these children is full of hardship and suffering. He asks who they live with. The children answer that there are 3 of them, and that their sister Pobble has gone out on business. Jack's sister is named Lena, and she cautiously asks Martin why he is interested in their family. Martin reassures Lena that he will not harm them. Jack asks where Martin is going. He replies that he needs to step away for 5 minutes. Martin thanks George for inviting him to the second floor of the tower, but admits that he does not want to stay in this location and asks for permission to leave. George does not answer, which irritates Martin, and he begins to demand to be released from the ghetto. The virtual screen informs Martin that to exit the location, he must pass the second floor of the tower. This news upsets Martin. He is worried about his friends and wants to return quickly. The guy can't hide his emotions, thinking about how the unexpected disappearance will upset his loved ones. He doesn't immediately notice that he is surrounded by a group of strangers who are silently watching him. The silence is broken by the voice of one of them, who asks Martin who he is and what he is doing here. The stranger suspiciously remarks that Martin looks like an outsider and asks what relation he has to the children. Martin looks around at those around him and realizes that they are aggressive and could threaten his life. He suggests that strangers calm down and not do anything rash. The crowd becomes increasingly aggressive, with accusations being made that Martin is a monster. At this moment, a worried Lena approaches Martin and asks if everything is okay with him. The crowd mistakes Lena for a monster, and one of the men tries to attack her. Lena screams in panic, begging to be left alone. Martin intervenes, pushing the attacker away with an elbow strike. But immediately after this, a crowd armed with bladed weapons attacks him. Martin once again calls on everyone to calm down and discuss the situation. At this time, he hears a voice telling him that in order to avoid being stuck in this location forever, he must complete a mission. Lena, crying, begs Martin to protect her and her brother from the aggressive crowd. Martin realizes that George has prepared a very difficult and strange test for him. Martin is deep in thought when suddenly an empty glass bottle flies into his head. Lena rushes towards him and the crowd screams, demanding that the monsters be destroyed immediately. An aggressive grandmother is stopped by a strange girl who grabs her hand and demands that she stop the lynching. George watches carefully, surprised by the stranger's actions. The girl decisively stops the crowd, demanding that they leave the children and the alien alone. Martin is surprised. He wonders who this girl is and why she is helping, because in his stories there was neither this location nor such a character. A girl who calls herself Pavel explains to the crowd that the children and the alien were not involved in the past murders. Martin thanks her, considering Pavel a kind and noble man. Martin asks Pavel to tell him about herself, and she explains that she works as a blacksmith and looks after the children after they were left alone. Pavel reports that many people have recently died in Jack and Lena's house. She adds that no suspects were found, and only mountains of corpses and 2 children remained in the house. Pavel remembers that a guy named George used to live with the children and suspects that this was his doing. George listens carefully to her words and becomes furious, calling her words nonsense. Martin calls George a psycho and demands that he be released from this location immediately. Pavel tells Martin that she needs to leave and asks him to look after the children. Martin turns to George, asking him to explain in detail what is happening. Martin believes there was a misunderstanding and believes that George was not involved in the deaths. When George doesn't respond, Martin decides he's simply being ignored. But George suddenly starts telling that he used to live with Jack and Lena. He traveled a lot and one day found himself in their house. George quickly found a common language with the children, and soon they became a real family. Martin wonders why Pavel suspects George of the murders. George himself does not understand why Pavel suspects him, because he has never met her before. George recalls the words of the demigod angel Prina, who mentioned that Martin had passed a level of insurmountable difficulty. He clearly remembers how Martin found a magical plant, the existence of which is unknown to ordinary people. George is left with many unanswered questions, wondering who Martin really is. Morning comes and the bright sun illuminates the town lost in the mountains. Martin hardly slept all night. He was tormented by disturbing thoughts that he could not get rid of. George is a fictional character from Martin's novels, created with a difficult fate, which Martin himself invented for the tower's owner. Martin's thoughts are interrupted by Lena, who asks if he is okay. She thanks him for saving her yesterday, and Martin says that he will leave their house for a while to take a little walk. Lena doesn't want to let him go, thinking that Martin will leave forever. He reassures her by promising to return, explaining that he just needs some fresh air. Before leaving, Martin uses his bracelet to feed the children teleported food. At the door of the house, Martin meets Pavel, who asks where he is going. He notices the basket of spoiled food in her hands and stops to take a closer look. Martin tells Pavel that there is no need to feed children such food anymore. His magic bracelet has solved the nutrition problem. He asks her to look after the children while he's away. As he heads towards the exit, he hears Pavel's voice, warning him to be extremely careful. Martin teleports his work laptop using his bracelet. He becomes increasingly convinced that something is wrong with George. He is not telling everyone everything and seems increasingly irritated. Martin decides to find out the reason for George's strange behavior by studying his novels. In one of them, a boy and a girl run through the forest, escaping from their pursuers. Suddenly, the girl screams, trips over a stone, and falls. She has seriously injured her leg and cannot continue running. Young George sees that Emily's dislocation is serious and she cannot move. They both watch as the demon worshippers approach. George is confused. He needs to run, but Emily can't walk. She begs her brother to leave her and save himself. But George firmly declares that he will never abandon his sister. Emily insists that George leave her and save his life. Otherwise, they will both die. George sharply demands that they shut up, assuring them that they will fight to the end. He decides to carry Emily to the nearest shelter to hide from his pursuers. Suddenly, a shrill whistle catches his attention and he turns around instantly. A huge wave of energy knocks him off his feet, causing him to fall. In the place where Emily was, there now lies a huge rectangular stone with a magical sign. George keeps repeating his sister's name, not believing that she is dead. He stands in front of a huge stone, and the voices of demon worshippers can be heard from the nearby bushes. Tears fill his eyes, and he apologizes to Emily for not being able to protect her. In another memory, George is racing through the city market with a stolen loaf of bread in his teeth. He tries to hide from his pursuers, and screams and curses can be heard behind him. Suddenly, a group of men block his path, and George realizes that he is trapped. George moves forward quickly, deftly dodging grabs. He laughs merrily and challenges his pursuers, offering to punish him if they catch him. Suddenly, a tall metal fence appears in front of him, and he curses it in irritation. The guy notices how the pursuers are approaching, threatening punishment. George decides not to give up, pushes off the ground, and jumps onto the fence. He manages to grab the top of the fence with his giant leap. Those around him are amazed by George's physical agility, not believing that he was able to jump so high. George thinks his pursuers are greedy because he only stole a loaf of bread. Suddenly, a huge hand grabs him by the neck and begins to strangle him. The giant states that George will soon find out how they deal with thieves. The giant then spins George around and throws him down with great force. George falls to the ground, realizing that he can't move after the impact. The drivers begin to explain to him that stealing is bad. A loud noise attracts the girl's attention. She decides to find out what is happening. Coming up, she demands that the beating be stopped immediately. George loses consciousness. His last memory is of a girl trying to talk to him. George feels a strong pain and opens his eyes. He sees many children around him. The boy tries to understand where he is, hearing the children's questions about his condition. Sitting up in bed, George asks where he is, and the children tell him it's a haven of hope. A girl named Martha brings a cup of hot soup and is happy to see him. George interrupts her by violently knocking over the food tray. The room goes silent. Everyone is stunned by George's reaction. The guy yells at Martha, accusing her of evil plans and calling her a witch. The children demand that George shut up. They don't like the way he insults Martha. The orphanage's children call George an ungrateful bastard and are going to punish him. George responds that children are fools and accuses Martha of lying for her own benefit. Martha looks at George with affection, believing that his anger is caused by past experiences. She reassures him that she has nothing to do with Everton's followers. George asks why she was brought here, causing the children and Martha to laugh. The guy is irritated and doesn't understand why everyone is laughing at him. Martha takes George to the training grounds where orphans practice sword skills. George is surprised that the shelter has a training ground. The orphans train to challenge Everton and take revenge on the demon followers. In addition to swords, they also learn to work with energy fields. Martha explains that every child in the orphanage is a victim of Everton. George remembers Emily's death and understands their burning desire for revenge. The guy tells Martha that she is crazy and does not believe that children can cope with demon worshippers. Martha replies that they have no choice. If they don't fight Everton, evil will consume everyone. She is sure that students should be strong and able to defend themselves. Martha knows about George's secret sword training, and he's surprised she found out about it. The shelter owner shows him the calluses on his hands from long training sessions. Martha invites George to join the students and train together. George refuses, stating that he does not know Martha and her charges and does not trust strangers. A guy leaves the training ground and meets an unfamiliar girl at the main building. The girl wants to meet the guy and says that she knows his name. George advises the girl to find someone else to talk to, as he is going to leave the shelter. The girl is confused, not understanding why George wants to leave. An orphanage boy offers George something to eat before leaving, but the girl says that George doesn't deserve lunch. George looks at the delicious food and realizes that he is very hungry. He decides to resist to the end, believing that he will not be bought for food. The orphanage's children come into the dining room and are happy that George has returned. A girl named Rose sits down opposite George and accuses him of lacking shame and conscience. She says that George only comes to eat and never washes the dishes. George begins to feel an unpleasant premonition and looks around warily. Rose notices that George is tense and asks why he is distracted. A stranger peers through the window, watching the conversation closely. George notices that the glass on the window is cracking. A powerful explosion scatters objects and people across the room. The room fills with acrid smoke. George lies on the floor trying to come to his senses. The guy is heavily stunned by the explosion and notices a particle of life force floating past him. She moves gracefully towards the door. A particle of life force approaches the jar of magic seeds and is instantly absorbed by them. A demon worshipper scolds a subordinate for miscalculating the force of an explosion. George decides to leave quietly, regretting his visit to the shelter. The guy sees Rose next to him and understands that she had no chance of surviving due to the proximity of the epicenter of the explosion. George is overcome with rage, realizing that the girl shielded him with her body during the explosion. The boy remembers how his sister died instead of him, and this increases his rage. Demon worshippers collect life particles from victims for magical seeds. One of them notices George and considers him a valuable test subject. The elder demon worshipper orders to immediately seize the boy. The command to protect George is given, and an energy shield appears around him. George is impressed by the skill of the orphans, who block the attack of the demon worshippers with a shield. One of the orphans assures the boy that he is safe. The orphans, having withstood the first blow, are preparing for a decisive counterattack. The elder demon worshipper realizes that the orphanage is home to many gifted children. He orders the most active orphans to be destroyed and the rest to be captured for experiments. The girl launches a swarm of magical blades at the demon worshippers. The magical blades must push back the demon worshippers so that the orphans can strengthen the shield. George realizes the girl's plan and begins to expand the energy barrier. The shield grows, providing temporary protection to orphans. The boy admires the tenacity and courage of the children who bravely stand up to Everton's servants. Demon worshippers bombard orphans with dark energy through magical pentagrams. The girl dodges the first attacks, but the next wave knocks her off her feet. She falls, dying but protecting the shelter. The commander of the demon worshippers demands the immediate destruction of the protective screen. His subordinates begin to rhythmically hit the screen, creating a loud crackling sound. The screen is covered with cracks, which foretells its imminent destruction. George watches in horror as the screen cracks and collapses. The demon worshipper demands that the orphans surrender, promising mercy in exchange for their capitulation. Meanwhile, dark energy gathers around the shield, and George realizes that it will flow inward once it is destroyed. One of the students reassures George, assuring him that the individual capsule is very strong and there is no threat. George is concerned about the fate of his pupils and does not understand why they are trying to save him. He suggests placing someone else in the capsule, but the student explains that it is too small. George declares that he is no better than others, to which the pupil only smiles mysteriously. Meanwhile, the demon worshippers destroy the protective shield and destroy all the shelter's defenders. George is filled with anger and impotent rage. He survives, but he cannot help the orphans. The demon worshipper loudly curses George, unable to destroy the capsule. Martha bursts into the room, her eyes full of rage as she looks at the destruction. Later, Martha and George stand in the cemetery, laying flowers on the graves of the deceased orphans. George apologizes to Rose, unable to come to terms with the fact that he was unable to protect her. Martha tells George that he is alive thanks to Rose. She begs the guy not to suffer and to continue living. Martha encourages George to become stronger to defeat evil in the future. She believes that evil will disappear with the fall of the demonic castle. Martha suggests that George join forces and take revenge on the demon worshippers together. George makes a wooden training sword from a pocket knife. He spends hours alone perfecting his skills. His skills grow and he fills his sword with mana. The blows become sharper. He tries to cut down a large tree. The remaining children at the shelter watch him train. The children see George breaking swords as he tries again and again to cut down the tree. The student is worried that George might suffer from overuse of mana. George feels like his legs can't hold him up. He starts to choke and loses his balance. When he wakes up, he jumps out of bed, not remembering how he got there. The boy realizes that he has lost consciousness again, and that the orphanage's children have helped him again, which makes him feel awkward. Martha appears on the doorstep, pleased with how George is recovering. One of the students notices that George reminds him of someone, but he can't remember who exactly. The foster child who looked after George says he looks like Emily. A nervous shudder runs through George when the foster child reveals that Emily arrived at the shelter a month before him. A student hands George a photo of Emily. George, remembering how his sister was crushed by a rock, thinks that it is just a coincidence with the name. Not believing his eyes, he sees a photo of his sister in a wheelchair. George grabs the guy by the shoulders, demanding to immediately tell him where Emily is. George continues to shake the guy, claiming that Emily is his sister. The student tries to find the words to answer. Martha tells George some terrible news. His sister died a month ago. George is speechless and falls into a stupor. Martha explains that Emily was pinned under a rock when she was found. She adds that Emily was brought to the shelter and given first aid. but the necrosis quickly spread. George realizes that when he left Emily, she was still alive. He realizes that he left his sister to die and cannot forgive himself for it. In the pouring rain, George rushes through the night forest to the cemetery. He finds Emily's grave and asks for forgiveness for leaving her to die. Suddenly, George hears Emily's voice. She says that she knew he would come. The morning sun illuminates the cemetery. The boy sits motionless near his sister's grave all night. George returns to the shelter and asks Martha for help. Martha calms him down and asks what she can do. George wants to avenge his sister and asks to teach him how to use mana. He trains hard, aiming to destroy Everton's followers. George realizes that he has too little mana and intense training does not help. He asks Martha how to increase his mana, and she asks him to lend her hand. George asks what is happening to him. Martha asks him to remain calm and not to make any sudden movements. Martha uses magic to measure the limits of his mana. She explains that each person has their own limit on how much mana they can use. Martha continues to explore subtle energetic structures. Martha is amazed. She discovers a rare anomaly in her mana level. George notices her shock and asks how serious the situation is with his mana. Martha explains that George's energy channels are blocked. She clarifies that mana is not circulating due to a complete block. George asks how much mana he has and how to unlock it. Martha reports that George's mana limit is 1,000 times higher than normal. George is surprised. He has so much mana, but he needs to unlock it. The guy asks Martha to help unblock the channels as quickly as possible. Martha warns that the block is saving his life. Releasing such mana could be deadly. Martha advises to develop mana slowly, to become stronger in order to master it completely. George is aware of his potential, which motivates him to study hard. In 5 years, he is able to cut down a century-old tree with one blow. By the age of 17, George has mastered sword techniques and mana control. Martha assures that the years of training have not been in vain, and George will soon be ready for his mission. The owner of the shelter asks George to show his skills with a sword. George can easily cut through wood and rock with one blow. The students are amazed by his skill. The guy, having let go of the sword, is ready mentally and physically for the upcoming mission. Marta, the owner of the shelter, invites all the children to come to her place. She takes out a magic map and begins to discuss the mission plan with them. Everton's demonic castle is hidden in the inaccessible mountains in the center of the continent. Demon worshippers are scattered throughout the world, collecting souls and trapping them in magical seeds. These seeds are sacrificed to the Hell Tree, which blooms once every 10 years to awaken the great demon. Martha and her team are determined to stop the demon worshippers. Martha says that all the seeds must be destroyed before the tree blooms. George ponders how to distribute regions of the continent among the mission participants. He chooses the most dangerous areas, the south and the north. The students doubt that George will be able to cope with 2 directions at once. George is confident in his abilities and suggests meeting at the demonic castle in a year. He methodically destroys the Hell Seeds and Everton followers in his path. George finds a magical seed from a fallen demon worshipper. He destroys the last seed in the city. Deciding to complete the cleanup faster, he heads to the next city. At the market, George sells the captured horse and receives a good sum for it. A little girl stops George, getting his attention. She sells flowers and asks to buy at least one. The girl reminds him of his dead sister, and he decides to make her happy. George buys all the flowers from the girl. She thanks him, but sheepishly warns him that the flowers have wilted a little. He replies that it is not a problem. Suddenly, a boy runs up to George, snatches the wallet, and tries to run away. George calls him a little rascal and demands that he return what he stole. He is going to catch up with the thief and asks the girl to look after the basket of flowers. When he turns around, he notices with surprise that the girl has also disappeared. The guy realizes that it was a cunning plan and the two work together. Lena and her brother empty George's wallet, rejoicing at their successful catch. The children's joy quickly turns to fear when they hear the voice of George, who has managed to track them down. Lena and Jack see that George is clearly unhappy with their prank. The guy deftly jumps off the ceiling, intending to teach the petty crooks a lesson. He grabs Jack and threatens to beat him with a belt. Lena begs George to forgive them, promising that this will not happen again. Lena tells a pitiful story, claiming that the money is needed for medicine for her sick mother. George doubts her words and offers to take him to the sick woman to check the veracity of the story. The children lead him to a large house where an old woman lies on a bed. Lena claims that they have no relatives and only they can help their mother. But George notices that the woman is too old to be their mother and begins to loudly scold the children for lying. Jack, realizing the failure of the plan, tells his sister that he warned her. Lena promises to return the money but asks to leave them at least a small part. George tries to convince them to earn an honest living, dissuading them from crime. Lena thinks they are too small to make an honest living. George understands that it will not be easy to convince the children. Lena insists that she has no other choice. This is the only way she can feed herself and her brother. George looks at the children and remembers his dead sister, killed by demon worshippers. He decides that if the children have an honest income, they will stop stealing. George warns Lena that if her brother is caught, he will face severe punishment. Lena demands that he stop intimidating her and promises to protect her brother at any cost. The guy decides that he has a little time to help street children. Lena and Jack live on the outskirts of the city in a dilapidated shack. The next morning, George comes to them and says it's time to get up. The children ask to take a nap, citing fatigue in the early morning. George begins to teach them how to use a sword, which they find difficult. Returning to the house, he asks how they are doing and says that he brought a lot of food. Seeing that the children are busy with something, George asks what they are doing. Jack replies that they decided to clean up while he was gone. George praises them for their work and says it's time for breakfast. Lena, hungry, asks to set the table quickly. George goes into the kitchen and asks to wait a bit while he prepares breakfast. There's a jar of magic seeds hidden under the children's bed. George tells the children that he is going to the market, and they ask him to bring something tasty. The first thing he does is go to the forge where his battle sword was restored. The blacksmiths report that the sword is ready, and George thanks them for their excellent work. He notices that the guard has become more comfortable, and the blacksmith's assistant, Pablo, looks at him with envy. The weather is getting worse, and the guy is freezing. Trying to get home faster. Entering the house, he sees Jack running out of the house at high speed. George senses something is wrong, stops Jack, and examines him carefully. He notices that the boy's hands are stained with blood. Jack hides his hands behind his back, and George asks where the blood is coming from. The guy is about to enter the room, but Jack screams loudly, begging him not to do it. George is horrified to see Lena standing in the room, surrounded by the bodies of murdered people. He asks what's going on, and notices a jar of magic seeds on the table. George demands an explanation as to why Everton's seeds are here. Suddenly, Lena attacks him, her hand turning into a metal blade. George dodges and kicks her to the side. He asks Jack where the seeds came from, but the boy claims he knows nothing about it. Lena continues to attack furiously, her sword arm delivering quick blows that George barely manages to parry. He orders Jack to leave immediately. George manages to knock Lena down and demands an explanation of what is happening. He asks what she has to do with Everton's seeds and how they ended up in their house. The boy doesn't want to believe that children can be followers of demon worshippers. But Jack sneaks up behind him and strikes, wounding George. George, badly wounded, asks the boy with pain in his voice why he did it. George tries to figure out when Everton's forces took control of Jack and Lena, because they were fine until lunch. Jack, with his hand transformed into a sword, continues his advance, approaching George. The guy dodges the deadly blows, noticing that Jack is not only armed but also significantly stronger. George realizes that he needs to stop Jack to protect others, and strikes him with his sword. But Jack, using his metal arm, skillfully blocks the attack. George looks at the children and begins to suspect that they have been Everton followers all along, hiding their true selves. Realizing the threat, George decides he must destroy them and swings his sword for the killing blow. But the orphans beg him to spare them and leave them alive. George looks at Lena and Jack, remembering all the moments he spent with them in this house. He gave them all the care and love he had given to his dead sister. His hands tremble, realizing that he cannot destroy the children he considered his own. George leaves the room and sternly orders Lena and Jack to never pick up a weapon again. Otherwise, next time he will not spare them. He then walks up to the table with the jar of magic seeds and destroys it with a blow of his sword. Wounded, George finds himself in the woods, convinced that he did the right thing by sparing the children. He passes out, but is found and saved by the demigod angel Prina and the exorcist Michael. Martin is lost in thought, surprised that his novels usually did not end so darkly and tragically. The mission of the second floor of the Magic Tower is now to get rid of the ghetto tumor. George is convinced that Lena and Jack are the tumors that need to be destroyed, and demands that Martin eliminate them. Martin, however, had not noticed any changes or transformations in the orphans recently. He believes that no one controls children's minds, and that they are no different from ordinary children. Suddenly, Martin hears people discussing a plan to attack the orphanage. He tries to sneak closer to better eavesdrop on the conversation. The townspeople plan to get rid of the demons tonight, and someone asks what to do with the new guy. Suddenly, someone sneaks up on Martin and holds a knife to his throat. Martin tries to leave, but is noticed and stopped by a townsman named Greek. The townsman tries to kill Martin by attacking him with his huge knife, but Martin manages to dodge and jump to the side. Greek considers Martin a demon and intends to deal with him quickly. Martin realizes that the second group of townspeople is probably already in the orphanage, and he must save them. Lena stands in front of her brother, protecting him from the aggressive townspeople who have entered the house and surrounded them. The townspeople call Martin a demon follower, and he tries to calm them down and convince them to stop. Martin realizes that time is short and decides to use the crowd's indecision to escape. He rushes to the exit, but Greek orders him not to leave the house. Martin, using his speed, deftly dodges the attacks and makes his way to the exit. George is impressed by Martin's tenacity in trying to save the orphans. Martin rushes to the orphanage, hoping he is not too late. Running inside, he sees a terrible picture. The entire room is littered with the corpses of murdered townspeople. In the corner of the room, he finds Lena and Jack crying and trembling with fear. Martin tries to contact George through the virtual screen, not believing the children could have arranged this. George blames himself, believing that he should have destroyed the werewolf orphans earlier. The tower's owner, George, insists that Martin destroy the children, but the boy categorically refuses. Martin runs up to Lena and Jack, hugs them tightly, trying to calm them down. He understands that children commit their terrible acts in an unconscious state and do not remember anything afterwards. Martin promises to help them get rid of the hellish curse and suggests that they leave the house immediately before anyone comes. Suddenly, he hears a piercing scream and turns to the door. An elderly woman stands on the threshold, surrounded by a group of armed townspeople. Martin assumes a fighting stance and orders the children to retreat back to safety. The townspeople, filled with hatred, approach, shouting curses at the werewolf children. Martin tries to convince the crowd that the children are Everton's victims, but his words only fuel their rage, because there are mountains of corpses lying before them. The angry crowd slowly advances on Martin, with the orphans hiding behind him. Martin activates the magical bracelet on his arm, teleporting a fighting staff into his hands. He prepares to clear a path of retreat. Gripping his weapon resolutely, Martin orders Lena and her brother to stick together and follow him. Reinforcements from the townspeople arrive, and they viciously attack Martin and the children. Martin uses the fighting pole expertly, deftly clearing an escape route. All the attackers soon lie unconscious, but Martin, avoiding fatal blows, leaves them alive. An elderly woman grabs him by the clothes and asks why they are doing this. While Martin is talking to her, one of the townspeople comes to his senses and decides to finish what he started. Martin instantly rushes to the orphan's defense, blocking the townsman's attack. Martin quickly eliminates the threat with his fighting pole. He orders the children to run to the exit, but Jack refuses to leave the house. Martin tries to understand why Jack doesn't want to leave, and learns that the boy misses George and hopes for his return. Martin thinks that running away will not solve the problem, and decides to explain to the townspeople that the children have become victims of evil forces. He teleports a bottle of holy water using a magic bracelet. George, watching from his tower, does not understand why Martin needs holy water. Suddenly, one of the townspeople sneaks up and stabs Martin in the back. A townsman asks Martin why he and the children killed all the people. Lena transforms. Her arm turns into a steel blade and she attacks the townsman. Greek and his squad burst into the room, but Martin warns them of the danger and asks them to leave before it's too late. Lena and Jack, with their hands transformed into combat blades, look attentively at the townspeople. Martin realizes that he needs to use holy water urgently before the werewolf children kill everyone. Lena, at great speed, rushes at a group of townspeople at the entrance. Martin intervenes in time, catches up with her and throws her aside with a blow from his pole. He stands in front of the girl, trying to understand what forces control the minds of orphans. Martin hears George's voice, insistently demanding that the werewolf children be destroyed immediately. But Martin is determined to find a way to save the orphans. He takes a bottle of holy water and slowly approaches Lena. At the last moment, Martin notices Jack trying to attack him from behind. He quickly throws a bottle of holy water at Jack, hoping to free his mind. The bottle breaks on the boy's head, and holy water falls on his body. Jack stops his attack and begins to scream loudly as dark energy begins to emerge from his body. Lena is not going to give up and attacks Martin. He quickly teleports another bottle of holy water from his bracelet. Dodging Lena's attacks, Martin douses her with holy water. The girl stops the attack, but at that moment she is hit by a stone thrown by angry townspeople. Martin furiously demands that the attack stop, but the crowd continues to throw stones at the children. Holy water has a powerful effect on werewolves. They scream while sitting on the floor. Within minutes, the mind control worms that the demons used to control them begin to emerge from the children's bodies. The townspeople are shocked as they watch this terrible spectacle. Martin understands that the worms cannot operate without a host, and guesses that he is somewhere nearby. A man appears on the threshold and the mind control worms instantly rush towards him. Martin knows that George is watching closely and wants the tower's master to see the true source of evil. The worms reach their host and jump onto his hands. In front of Martin stands Pavel, the host of the parasites that until recently controlled the minds of children. Martin teleports a bottle of holy water using a magic bracelet to heal his wound. Martin decides to finish off Pobble as soon as possible and hears the surprised voice of George, who has realized the true cause of the disasters. Pobble, consumed with hatred, begins killing townspeople, especially angry at Martin for revealing her secret. Approaching Martin, she says with disdain that he has no idea how much time and effort she put into creating the werewolf children. With each curse he utters, Pobble methodically destroys the townspeople around him, demonstrating his cruelty. The remaining townspeople flee the cursed house, leaving Martin face to face with Pobble. Martin demands that she leave the children alone immediately, but Pobble calls them to him. She claims that Martin has no idea who these children really are. Martin is surprised to hear that the children are not people at all. She claims that Lena and Jack are monsters who can take on any form. Suddenly, Pobble's voice is heard, accusing the boy of protecting monsters disguised as humans. The girl tells Martin that these monsters took their form after eating children's bodies. Martin orders Lena and Jack to ignore Pobble, insisting that she is lying. Lena can't contain her feelings, not wanting to believe that she is a monster. The girl declares that the children are just ordinary monsters and furiously attacks Martin. The guy deftly dodges Pobble's attacks, demonstrating incredible reflexes. The girl says that she should be thanked for the enormous amount of work she has done. Pobble, wandering through the city's slums at night, often came across corpses. One day she found a valuable thing on the deceased, Everton's magic crystal. Martin abruptly orders her to shut up and throws her aside with a blow. Pobble asks why he is so fiercely protective of monsters. Martin tells the children not to listen to her and to move to a safe distance. The demigod angel Prina failed to destroy Everton's magic crystal, which completely violates the plot of Martin's novel. The crystal allows entities to penetrate the host and take over his mind. Pobble lunges at the protagonist, threatening to destroy him and feed him to the demons. Martin fights her with a fighting staff, parrying her furious attacks. George's voice encourages him. The guy demands that Pobble stop treating children like objects to achieve his own selfish goals. Martin activates the dive skill by selecting the Spearmaster Roma. His agility, striking power, and connection with the spear are greatly enhanced. Pobble, thanks to the Everton crystal, gains the ability to disarm and prepares to use it in battle. Any weapon that touches it is immediately destroyed. Pobble's ability does not work on George's sword, but Martin cannot use it. Martin's only chance is to use the lightning magic of the Spearman Roma. However, he notices that Pobble's aura has changed and can now reflect lightning strikes. Martin finds a solution. He delivers a series of powerful kicks that Pobble is unable to parry. Pobble falls, realizing that Martin is anticipating her movements. Martin activates his lightning magic at full power, preparing to finish the fight in hand-to-hand combat. Martin unleashes a powerful series of blows on Pobble, her defenses crumbling under the onslaught of his strength and lightning. Pobble coldly states that the outcome of the battle will not change anything. The werewolves will remain monsters. She claims that werewolf children are just tools for greater purposes. Martin realizes that Everton's crystal fuels her envy and hatred. Pobble has always been a secondary character, her soul filled with envy towards successful people. Martin invites her to free herself from this envy that is destroying her from within. He uses the spear's lightning power to cleanse Pobble of the crystal's influence. An explosion of energy destroys a miserable shack in the ghetto. Martin neutralizes Everton's magic crystal by removing it from Pobble's body. He clutches the crystal in his hand and destroys it, successfully completing the mission to clear the second floor of the tower. Lena and Jack are standing in the corner, scared, and Martin wants to go over to calm them down. Looking around, he sees many dead townspeople and realizes that such a bloody massacre was not in the plot of his novel. Martin begins to wonder why the plot of his stories changes. His thoughts are interrupted by Pobble's voice, declaring that it is not over yet. Pobble demands the werewolves be returned to her and sends mind control worms at the children. One of the worms bursts into Lena's mind, and Jack screams, demanding to leave his sister alone. Pobble realizes that the implantation into Lena's mind was successful and tries to completely subjugate her. Martin hurriedly activates the magic bracelet, trying to teleport the holy water as quickly as possible. Lena is enveloped in particles of divine energy, commanding the worms to leave her mind immediately. Frightened by his sister's transformation, Jack cuddles up to Martin, who tries to calm the werewolf boy down. Lena rises above the ground, emitting a bright golden light. Martin notices a transformation field forming around her. Using it and divine energy, Lena transforms into a double of George. Lena, now in the guise of George, declares herself the messenger of justice and prepares to strike at Pobble. Pobble screams in rage, realizing that she has completely lost control over the werewolves. Lena, in the guise of George, stands before a stunned Martin, exulting in her liberation. Lena approaches the defeated Pobble and returns to her normal form. Jack, realizing that the danger has passed, rushes to his sister and hugs her tightly. Admiring her transformation, he asks how she managed to do it. Lena says that she felt scared, as if she was endlessly plunging into a dark sea abyss. In this state, she realized that she was a werewolf who was being manipulated by evil people. Suddenly, she saw a bright light, and the only thought she had was to reach out to that light to reconnect with it. Lena hears George's voice encouraging her, telling her to never give up. She tells Jack that he too has the ability to transform. He just needs to imagine the image he wants to turn into. Jack concentrates, trying to summon a transformation field, but it doesn't work. Without giving up, he continues to try, keeping the desired image in his mind. Martin watches as Jack finally successfully transforms into a small floating creature. Realizing that he needs to leave the tower, Martin invites the children to leave with him. He says there are many villages nearby where they can start a new life. Lena and Jack don't want to leave their hometown because they have lived here all their lives. They decide to stay in their house, waiting for George to return. Suddenly, Martin hears a voice announcing the beginning of the movement from the tower, and the space around him begins to collapse. There is a destroyed quarter in the city that was not restored after the earthquake. Khan and Yuna search this area for Martin using the mana detector. Yuna can't hold back her tears, fearing for Martin, and Khan tries to comfort her. Suddenly, there is a loud bang, and the deserted streets of the abandoned neighborhood are illuminated by a bright flash of light. Martin emerges from the fiery cocoon, annoyed that he moved so quickly and did not have time to say goodbye to the werewolf children. Coming to his senses after teleportation, he's surprised to notice that the children are next to him. Martin is confused, not understanding how and why they moved with him. Lena and Jack nervously ask where their house has disappeared to. Martin asks them to take human form. The children turn into their normal appearance, but the new, unfamiliar environment frightens them greatly. Martin reassures the werewolf children, explaining that they are in a neighboring area of his city and have nothing to worry about. Lena and Jack realize they are far from home and begin to worry that George won't be able to find them if he returns. Martin assures them that they will definitely meet George in the future. Suddenly, Yuna appears from around the corner of the destroyed building and quickly runs up to Martin. She hugs him tightly and starts crying loudly, and Martin tries to comfort her. Yuna talks about how scared she was when Martin suddenly disappeared. The guy apologizes to her, explaining that he had a special secret mission. Khan approaches his friends and notices that Yuna was very worried about Martin, asking him not to disappear so suddenly in the future. He is surprised to learn that Martin has visited the sword tower and cleared its first floor. Martin's friends are amazed that he was able to penetrate a new, almost unknown tower. Yuna asks Martin who the children who arrived with him are. Martin suddenly replies that they are his children, which shocks his friends, and they choke on their drinks in surprise. He asks the children to introduce themselves, and they happily meet his friends. Yuna, charmed by the children's appearance, offers them ice cream. Suddenly, a virtual screen appears in front of Martin, notifying him of an urgent call to the first floor of the sword tower. Martin manages to ask friends to look after the children before his move begins. The space around him begins to collapse, and he is teleported to a magical tower. Martin finds himself in a huge deserted clearing in a mountain valley. He hears approaching footsteps and turns around sharply, but immediately feels a sharp blade pressing against his throat. George stands in front of him, with an angry expression on his face, demanding answers to his questions. The tower's master looks closely at Martin and asks if he is a follower of demon worshippers. Martin can't help but admire George's appearance, his dark hair and huge crimson eyes. Suddenly, George swings his blade, striking just inches from Martin. He again asks whether Martin is an Everton follower. George adds that ordinary people are unaware of the existence of mind-controlling brainworms. The tower owner is worried that Martin knows details that even he doesn't. George recalls how Martin immediately found woven coconut fiber on the first floor of the tower, which only increased his suspicions. Martin ponders how to calm George down and whether he should tell him the whole truth. George understands that Martin's actions are aimed against Everton, but he is still plagued by doubts. He suspects that Martin is hiding something and decides to check on him soon. Martin begins to speak, explaining that originally there were no towers on Earth. He explains that magical towers began to appear based on myths and legends, and if a hero passes the test, he gains the right to own the tower. Martin mentions that in the novels he read, there was a story about George, where he fought a great devil along with other heroes. He continues by talking about the 7 towers that appear in the novel, one of which is the Sword Tower. At this time, Everton and the demon worshippers appear on the scene, seeking to enslave the entire world. Martin doubts that George will believe that he is a character from his novel. However, George believes Martin's words and understands that he is not connected with Everton. Martin declares that he intends to stop Everton and his followers in order to protect the world. George warns that with Martin's current abilities, it will be difficult to achieve this goal. Before leaving, he invites Martin to return to the tower to prepare for the final battle. In his tower, George sits on his throne, pondering the information he received from Martin. He imagines a powerful being who can transform fictional stories into real worlds. George understands that Martin is not revealing much, but still decides to trust him. The demigod angel Prina begins to suspect that Martin is hiding something and reports it to George. Prina mentions that during prayer she feels an energy similar to that emanating from Martin. Meanwhile, the werewolf children have become close friends with Martin's friends and are having fun together. Martin prepares for the upcoming challenging training sessions under the guidance of George. He is especially pleased that Yuna and Lena quickly became close friends. Martin asks Yuna how Emma is feeling, as he hasn't heard from her for a long time. Yuna replies that Emma is in the Superhero Association's Rehabilitation Center. Martin decides to visit Emma and goes to the center. When he enters her room, Emma stands by the window and slowly turns towards him. Martin is happy to see Emma and offers her her favorite drink. He apologizes for not coming earlier, explaining that he was very busy. Martin asks how she feels and when she will be discharged. Emma starts crying, saying that she is scared. She can no longer use mana. The doctors did a full examination and reported that her mana channels were blocked. The doctor tried to calm her down by offering to work in the analytical department or find another job. But Emma is very upset because she always dreamed of becoming a great superhero. Emma experiences deep psychological suffering and confesses to Martin that her dream of becoming a superhero will never come true. Martin remembers his past life and realizes how painful it is when a dream he has worked towards his whole life collapses. Emma, feeling guilty, asks for forgiveness and asks Martin to leave so she can be alone. Martin walks slowly down the hospital corridor, lost in deep thoughts. He recalls how his novel gave him the chance to become a superhero, but he realizes that for many, dreams remain unattainable and are in danger because the plot of his novel and reality often diverge. Martin decides to put aside unnecessary thoughts and focus on the main thing, to do everything so that no one else gets hurt. Martin plans to use the immersion skill in a completely new way. The first thing he decides to do is to take control of the current situation. He opens his laptop and dives into studying his stories. In his novel, The Age of Destruction, the Great Devil has 6 levels of magical power. Martin realizes that he must fight 6 followers of the devil who have received this power. He recalls the apostle of Satan Amol and analyzes his characteristics, comparing them with the description in his novel. Martin remembers that Amol was attacked by a lower-ranking formless demon, meaning he cannot be a true apostle. Lower-ranking demons are subordinate to the true apostles, which forces Martin to reconsider his conclusions. He delves into the characteristics of the real apostles from his novel and realizes that his current skills are not enough to stop them. Meanwhile, the werewolf children spend a lot of time in front of the television, enjoying cartoons, a rare luxury in their home world. Martin decides to go to the sword tower and asks the children if they want to meet George. At this time, Master Lucas looks thoughtfully out the window of his office. Master Lucas's solitude is broken by a girl named Rachel, who enters the office with a young man. She notices his sickly appearance and asks what happened. Lucas explains that when using mana, anomalies occur. Rachel takes his hand, intending to conduct a diagnostic of the energy channels. She reports that one of the mana supply channels is damaged and will not be able to fully recover. Rachel eases Lucas' pain and asks why he needed so much mana. Lucas is upset to realize that he can no longer use the maximum amount of mana. Rachel warns Lucas to be extremely careful with his mana usage in the future, as maxing out his mana could cause irreversible damage. Lucas thanks her for her help and promises to be careful not to overload the damaged channel. He then tells Rachel that he recently had an interesting student. According to him, this boy may seem spoiled, but he has great potential hidden within him. Lucas asks Rachel to conduct a full examination of Martin. The girl agrees, promising to help. Master Lucas is confident that a comprehensive examination of Martin will reveal much more about his student. Rachel remembers Emma, who has completely lost the ability to control mana. Emma is in a deep depression. Much time has passed, but mana has not returned. The attending physician encourages Emma to accept the situation, promising that new methods of recovery will be tried in the future. Emma starts to cry, and the doctor comes up to her and tries to comfort her, assuring her that everything will be fine. Meanwhile, the demon worshippers' office is heavily damaged and their dead bodies are lying on the floor. One of the demon worshippers barely shows signs of life, quietly groans and tries to crawl away. A dark priest of enormous stature approaches him, contemptuously calling all demon worshippers a bunch of stupid mediocrities. The survivor begs for mercy, promising to complete the task next time. The priest, outraged by such a request, hits him hard. A girl in dark clothes enters the room, disappointed by a series of failures. She's puzzled why an entire squad is unable to complete a simple task. The girl, with obvious irritation, declares that she is tired of working with losers and fools. The dark priest irritably reminds the girl that he had long offered his assistance in the operation. Without losing her cool, she throws an animal skull at him, declaring that she has no time for such trifles. The priest goes into a wild rage, ready to destroy everything around him. The girl calmly says that she doesn't care, and he raises his hand to strike. At that moment, a powerful explosion is heard on the upper floors of a skyscraper in the business center. A mysterious girl known as Cheval ranks high among the demon worshippers. Meanwhile, Martin and the werewolf children stand in front of the sword tower. Lena and Jack are amazed by its grandiose size. The magical sword tower soars into the sky hundreds of meters, its upper floors hidden in the clouds. Lena, not seeing any doors, asks Martin how they are going to get inside the tower. Martin wonders if the werewolf children will be able to enter the tower in human form. He asks them to assume the appearance of adults to facilitate entry. Lena and Jack happily comply with the request, taking on the appearance of young people they have seen on television. Martin then makes an unusual request. He asks the children to temporarily turn into objects. Lena and Jack turn into rings that Martin puts on his hand. Martin approaches the huge ritual stone in front of the sword tower and places his hand on it. At that moment, the space around Martin begins to disappear, and he finds himself inside the sword tower. The werewolf children are delighted with the move and immediately ask when they can see George. Martin cannot figure out what floor he is on, but he hears a voice saying it is the 3rd floor. George appears in front of him, instantly sensing the presence of Lena and Jack. The werewolf children assume their true forms and happily rush towards George. Lena and Jack couldn't hold back their tears as they admitted how much they missed each other. The tower's owner warmly replies that he also missed them very much. George turns to Martin, asking what he was doing and why he was late. Martin confidently replies that he is fully prepared for the grueling training. The werewolf children sleep peacefully in the shade of a huge tree while George instructs Martin. The protagonist receives the mission, Confession of the Tower Owner, and asks what training awaits him. George points in the direction of where the training ground is. Martin looks at the distant mountains, but George suggests that he look down. The main character notices in horror a deep gorge that he had not noticed before. George suggests that Martin jump into the gorge, but he categorically refuses, considering it madness. Without hesitation, George pushes him down, and Martin falls screaming into the depths. At the bottom of the gorge, a huge lake awaits him, into which he falls, promising to take revenge as soon as he gets to the top. Martin dries his wet clothes and begins to explore the surrounding area. Martin realizes that he has entered the Grand Canyon, where George was trained by Martha. This place is filled with natural mana and inhabited by dangerous wild monsters. Martin sees this location as a chance to boost his mana and collect rare artifacts. George tracks Martin's movements at the bottom of the gorge, giving him a week to study on his own. He recalls how he himself once trained in this place. George vividly remembers the moment when the shelter's owner, Martha, threw him into the Grand Canyon. Martin, exploring the area, finds a clearing covered in a huge amount of woven fiber. Martin was lucky. He witnessed a rare flowering of the plant, which occurs only once every few years and accumulates a huge amount of mana. Among the woven fiber, he finds rare fruit saturated with concentrated mana. Without wasting any time, Martin begins to eat the juicy fruits, and his body is filled with magical energy. Martin knows well that woven fiber not only produces useful fruits, but also has a unique root system. The plant's roots contain rare red moth larvae, which improve mana circulation. Without wasting any time, Martin begins collecting this magical plant. In the evening, after a hard day, he decides to rest and try the red moth larvae. By eating ripe fruits and larvae, he feels his body being filled with a huge amount of mana. Suddenly, a virtual screen appears in front of him, informing him of a significant increase in his mana level. Martin decides not to stop there and eats fried larvae, considering this method of increasing mana ideal. But from the dark forest thicket, a huge wild monster emerges into the light of the fire. The guy hears the crunch of bushes behind him and slowly turns around. At that moment, a 2-meter wild bear suddenly pounces on him. The animal slowly approaches, and Martin identifies it as a Class 3 war bear. Concentrating enormous magical energy in his fist, he raises his hand to strike. Martin brings down a powerful blow on the bear's head, filling his fist with magical power. The bear instantly loses consciousness. Martin deals with the predator with one blow, but then a pack of silver wolves attacks him. Martin remains calm, confident that he can easily cope. He remembers his first fight with a magical wolf in a supermarket. Deciding to stretch his legs, Martin uses his magic bracelet to teleport his battle sword. A bright light burns on the upper floors of the tower where demon worshippers have gathered. The man reports that the peace flower is ready for use. Cheval admires a rare magical plant, amazed by its beauty and potential. The dark priest declares that the old tactics no longer work. Something new is needed. The man at the window warns that a secret operation is about to begin, and its failure is unacceptable. Cheval informs Rick that everything is ready to capture the 8th hero. She warns of possible difficulties due to a serious obstacle on the way. Cheval talks about Lucas's craftsmanship and his unique skills. Rick, standing by the window, calms those present, promising to take care of Lucas. He believes it is time to meet an old battle friend. Martin, in the Grand Canyon, is actively exterminating wild monsters without wasting time. Each victory Martin achieves over an enemy improves his combat characteristics and skills. He puts his battle sword back into his magic bracelet, deciding that he has increased his mana enough and is about to return. But first he wants to collect valuable magical plants and rare artifacts. Martin activates an enhanced detection skill to find valuable items. He finds rare magical minerals nearby. To get to them, you need to climb a high mountain. The minerals are located in a cave behind a ledge on the rock. The climb is difficult, and Martin decides to use mana to make the task easier. It channels mana energy between the stones, creating an explosion that opens the way to magical minerals. The guy reaches the entrance to the cave, where a priceless treasure awaits him. There are a huge number of magical stones inside the cave. Martin selects the most valuable magical minerals, surprised by their size and weight. He channels mana into the windstone, activating its hidden properties for levitation. Martin now plans to use the windstone to escape the Grand Canyon. The guy is going to take as many magical minerals with him as possible. The next morning, George gets up carefully so as not to wake the werewolf children. The noise from the cliff attracts his attention. A happy and contented Martin appears in George's field of vision. Martin reports that he passed the test, and George praises him for completing the task in 4 days instead of the allotted 7. George notices that Martin's combat skills have improved significantly, and his mana levels have increased. He informs Martin that the next stage of training is mastering sword techniques. Martin realizes that his physical skills and mana are almost on par with George. The protagonist plans to add real-life combat experience that he will need to defeat Everton. George orders Martin to assume a fighting stance and prepares to attack. He suddenly rushes into attack, but Martin manages to dodge at the last moment. Martin tries to defend himself with magic, but it is not enough to stop George. George's powerful blows break Martin's defense and send him flying. George notices that he is using a wooden practice sword and is attacking at half strength. He orders Martin to not stand still and start attacking him. Martin realizes that George could easily destroy him if he used all his power. Having suppressed his fear, Martin decides to make a desperate attack. Increased mana helps Martin keep the rhythm of the battle and repel George's counterattacks. However, the guy is irritated. He has not been able to hit George even once during the entire training session. George tries to understand why, despite his improved performance, Martin is not showing progress in combat. The tower's owner believes that real training will begin when a real threat to life appears. George's powerful blow sends Martin flying into a tree, which breaks from the impact. George reminds us that every time a person faces death and survives, he becomes stronger. The doctor carefully studies Emma's medical record and notes an improvement in her health. Emma feels physically better, but suffers from mental anguish. The doctor tells the girl that there is one last test left, a simple blood draw. The medical worker smiles evilly and declares that the blood sampling will begin immediately. Martin continues to fend off George's powerful attacks, and he needs to hold out for another hour before the training is over. The guy is very tired, but he is happy that he is beginning to sense George's attacks. Confident in his ability to anticipate the enemy's actions, Martin decides to counterattack. The counterattack is successful. George retreats and takes a defensive position. George declares that the time for games is over and begins to deliver a series of powerful blows. Martin asks for a short break, but George replies that in a real battle there will be no breaks. The tip of the wooden blade approaches Martin's face, and he hears the signal that the sparring is over. George tells Martin that he was lucky, but in a real fight he would have been dead. A subordinate informs Master Lucas about a series of terrorist attacks on the outskirts of the city. He adds that many civilians were injured. Master Lucas studies classified documents, not understanding the terrorists' goals. Everton's signs were found at the scene of the attack and are now being examined by experts. Lucas believes that such atrocities could only be carried out by first-generation superheroes. The Master's thoughts are interrupted by the loud sound of the door opening. An excited young man bursts into the office. The guy tells the master about a new magic tower on the outskirts of the city. This black tower is called the Tower of the Reincarnated Hero. Master Lucas decides to visit her immediately. He orders to gather information about the tower and find out the location of a superhero named Rick. Lucas activates his magical vision and sees traces of mana leading to the tower. The master realizes that the footprints belong to a first-generation superhero, and the tower is connected to Everton. Lucas orders the tower to be cordoned off, and the situation to be reported to him every hour. In the tower of the reborn hero, the captive alchemist, chained to the ceiling, prays for help. Rick approaches the captive and silently watches his suffering. Rick reports that the alchemist's mana is almost completely absorbed, and he will die soon. The alchemist begs for mercy, mentioning his 2 children. Rick takes out his gun and fires. The dark priest enters, dissatisfied with Rick's actions, as the number of captives for experiments is running low. The priest tells Rick that there are not enough captives to continue the experiment. Rick demands that the dark priest not shift other people's problems onto him. The priest glares at Rick with hatred, his eyes full of dark intentions. Rick becomes filled with rage, his hatred for the priest becoming obvious. A huge dark energy is emitted from it, and a crimson aura is formed around it. Dark energy turns into matter, wrapping itself around the priest's body. The matter reaches the priest's throat and begins to choke him. Rick approaches the dark priest with a gun pointed at his head. He warns the priest that such disrespect could cost him his life. Cheval enters the room and urges everyone to calm down and focus on the task at hand. She examines the dead alchemist and expresses dissatisfaction that the experiments did not achieve their goal. Rick advises his colleagues to work harder, as they lack mana to open the Hell Gate. Cheval notes that without the 8th hero's mana, opening Hell's Gate will be impossible anytime soon. The Dark Priest is confident that the 8th hero must be captured before his mana is fully awakened. Rick suggests using Master Lucas, who has enough mana to open the gate. Lucas is a top-class superhero with a huge supply of mana. Cheval believes that capturing the 8th hero who has not yet awakened will be much easier than using Lucas. Rick warns that luring Master Lucas into the tower may take a long time, but suggests giving it a try. Cheval notes that Lucas will be extremely difficult to deal with, but Rick confidently states that he will take it on himself. Their conversation is interrupted by the sudden appearance of the Great Dark Master. The Great Dark Master, Conrgitas, enters the room and everyone kneels before him. As a reincarnated superhero, Conrgitas asks why there is so little mana collected. Rick apologizes to him, explaining that the process is being delayed due to difficulties in finding the location of the 8th hero. Conrgitas leaves the room, demanding that tomorrow's operation be flawless. He looks out the window at the people at the entrance to the tower, contemptuously considering them to be disgusting insects. Meanwhile, Martin and George continue their intensive training. Martin's sword skills improve significantly, and he is now able to repel George's lightning-fast attacks. The tower owner asks how Martin is feeling because he hasn't slept for more than 2 days. Martin replies that he is completely fine, thanks to his supply of recovery potions. Martin insists on continuing his training. The many hours of practice bear fruit. His sword technique has improved significantly. He is already able to defend against most of George's moves. The tower owner warns Martin that he will now use complex technology. George attacks using his signature move, the frontal attack. Martin manages to block the blow, but he lacks experience in close combat. George seizes the moment and suddenly makes a sweep, sending Martin to the ground. Martin instantly regroups and quickly rises to his feet, ready to continue the fight. He throws a punch that George can't parry, but Martin's joy is short-lived. George knocks the training sword out of his hands. George announces that they are moving on to the next level of training. The Sword Tower Master says the warm-up was good and now he'll tell Martin about a new skill. George explains that every superhero must have a unique skill and is going to create a uniform that will suit Martin. Martin is aware that this is a concept that he himself described in his novel. A unique skill is awakened only in a select few, and the form is created through hard work. Martin's combat skills will grow along with his character and mana. George notes that using the form is the easiest way to destroy enemies. George asks Martin to get ready to demonstrate the use of the form. He explains that his favorite form is called Space Slice. A huge fiery aura forms around George and he raises his sword to strike. Martin is overcome with wild horror. He has never seen such power. Shocked, he watches the destruction brought about by the Space Slash strike. George explains to Martin that all superheroes have different forms, but they are united by mana energy. The demigod angel Prina possesses a form that allows her to connect divine energy with the human world. Exorcist Michael uses the form to manipulate subtle energy fields. George emphasizes that form reflects the essence of a person, and Martin can create a unique form that suits only him. Martin is genuinely happy and decides to develop his own form skills soon. Cheval screams in rage. Unable to pick up the eighth hero's vibrations and determine his location, Rick stands at the window, watching the people at the foot of the tower. The Dark Priest loses patience and insists on starting the operation immediately. Rick plans to use the World Flower to open the Hell Gate, but to do so, he needs Master Lucas's mana. Cheval, being next to the sleeping girl, agrees with Rick's plan. Cheval tries to wake up the sleeping girl, indignant at how one can sleep at such a moment. The girl, half asleep, explains that she cannot fight sleep, but Cheval demands that she stop time around the tower. Rick immediately orders the girl to do this so that their departure will go unnoticed. The girl agrees, warning that the effect will not last long. Rick understands her words, noticing many people with mana at the foot of the tower. The girl goes into a trance, slowing down time around the Tower of Rebirth. Rick and his comrades leave the tower. Time stands still around the tower, and a dark priest mocks a motionless man. He scolds the young man, asking how he could break the healing potion. The young man experiences strange sensations, not remembering how he dropped the flask with medicine. In the crowd, a stranger begins to behave strangely and is surrounded by dark energy. The man falls and convulses. Passers-by try to help him. Revealing himself to be Everton's follower, he successfully summons the monster, causing the people to flee in panic. The huge monster roars loudly, rushing in pursuit of the fleeing people. A pack of aggressive wolves attacks the defenseless inhabitants of the city, and a stranger watches the chaos from the roof of a tall building. Rick, standing on the same roof, announces to his comrades that their time has come and invites them to have some fun. He prepares to activate the magic flower to open the hellish portal. At this time, the Dark Priest jumps from the roof, heading straight for the fleeing townspeople. The Dark Priest creates streams of fiery energy in his hands, preparing to unleash them on innocent people. Cheval teleports hordes of monsters that rush into the city streets. At this time, Master Lucas, being in his office, is studying secret documents. After analyzing the data, he realizes that Mr. Rick is in the Rebirth Tower. The office door opens and Rachel enters with breaking news. Rachel reports the mysterious disappearance of many superheroes and links it to the Tower of Rebirth. Master Lucas, calmly sipping coffee, listens to her attentively. A young man enters the office and suggests that they immediately explore the Tower of Rebirth. Master Lucas reveals that the tower contains a first-generation superhero named Rick. Master Lucas mentions that the city's superhero headquarters was recently attacked. Many employees went missing, and Rick is behind it. He notes that the Rebirth Tower is heavily guarded and plans to capture Rick when he leaves the tower. Suddenly, the conversation is interrupted by noise and loud explosions in the street, and Rachel wonders what it could be. Master Lucas and his assistants immediately go outside and head towards the city center to find out what is going on. A huge number of monsters broke out of the magical dungeons into the real world, destroying everything in their path. Rick is confident that activating the magical flower will attract Master Lucas's attention, luring him into a trap. The city is plunged into chaos. Monsters exterminate defenseless people and set houses on fire. They quickly take over more and more areas, leaving residents with only one option: to flee. Master Lucas is puzzled as to how Rick managed to leave the Rebirth Tower unnoticed. The night sky is suddenly illuminated by a bright light from the Flower of Life, and Lucas notices it immediately. He understands that if the Flower of Life opens a hellish portal, human civilization is threatened with enslavement and destruction. Virtual screens appear in front of all the superheroes in the country, calling on them to stop the great evil. Master Lucas orders his subordinates to immediately begin evacuating the residents, and he himself heads to the Flower of Life to prevent the portal from opening. He takes out his phone and tries to contact the government and the Minister of Defense. Lucas reports that the threat is much more serious than he thought, and insists on declaring a state of emergency. Master Lucas's next call informs the Sky Palace Guild of a mortal threat. His mind is consumed by anger and hatred. He decides to destroy Everton at any cost. Rick hopes that Lucas will fall into his trap and looks forward to meeting him. Meanwhile, Martin continues to hone his sword skills in the Sword Tower. Martin, through immersion, can apply the skills of the heroes of his novel, but this is not enough. He strives to master his unique form. Lena is worried that Martin is overtiring himself because he doesn't give himself any rest, being completely immersed in training. The protagonist reflects on his unique form skill, trying to understand its essence. Realizing that the tower from his novel has become reality, Martin decides that his ability is related to creation. Now, Standing in the middle of a forest clearing, he concentrates on creating a magical braided fiber. George and the werewolf children approach Martin, and the owner of the sword tower asks what he is doing. George reminds Martin that he has little time, and he must find his form as quickly as possible. Suddenly, George is distracted by a change in the energy field around them. He sees a large flower of magical woven fiber appear next to him. Martin and the werewolf children suddenly find themselves near a magical stone at the entrance to the tower, and Martin wonders why George teleported them. Jack tells Martin with a smile that he had fun and asks to visit the sword tower again. Lucas thoughtfully promises the werewolf children that they will visit George again in the future. Meanwhile, Master Lucas and the superheroes set up an energy shield to protect the city from monsters. Martin returns to the Superhero Association office and is surprised by the silence and lack of people. In the corridor, he meets Khan and Yuna, who immediately ask where he has been all this time. They inform Martin that while he was away, the city was subjected to a powerful attack by monsters. The situation in the city is catastrophic. People are running from monsters, trying to hide in emergency shelters. Martin learns that the hero of his novel, the great Dark Master Conragitas, has become reality. In his novel, the Dark Master was destroyed in the first chapter, which is completely inconsistent with the current situation. Khan and Yuna suggest not to waste time and head to the city to confront Everton. Yuna reports that she has already completed all calculations for teleportation. The friends, very excited, hold hands, and the teleportation to the city captured by monsters begins. A circle of fire forms in the wasteland, from which Martin and his friends emerge. Yuna looks around and realizes that there was a calculation error. She realizes that someone has interfered with the teleportation process and changed the coordinates. At that moment, a huge monster sneaks up on her from behind. Yuna turns around sharply, seeing a huge sword in the monster's hand approaching her. Martin reacts instantly and cuts down the monster with a practiced blow, saving Yuna. Martin and his friends find themselves very close to the Flower of Peace, which emits powerful energy. Martin doesn't understand how the demon worshippers were able to gather such a huge amount of mana. In his novel, the great Dark Master Conragitas used his own mana to open the gates of hell. Yuna, very nervous, suggests that Everton's followers may have captured Master Lucas. Martin suggests that his friends start running, realizing that there is very little time left. The guy thinks that first you need to destroy the Flower of Life, and then deal with Everton's followers. People have many desires, and their perverted desires make them easy prey for universal evil. The devil constantly tempts such people, feeding his powers on their souls. In Martin's novel, only one first-generation superhero could not resist the devil's temptation, Master Conragitas. Dark Master Conragitas gave his soul and mana to the devil, calling great evil into the world. Martin is attacked by a pack of hellwolves, but he deftly dodges them. Together with his friends, he methodically destroys the monsters of the dungeon. Martin rushes to the Flower of Life to stop the summoning process. Martin encourages his friends, reminding them that the city center is just a short distance away. George watches the battlefield, worried that Martin is facing such a powerful enemy as Conragitas. Martin hopes that the 8th Chosen One will soon awaken and help them in the battle. George hears the voice of the demigod angel Prina, who hopes that Martin will cope with the mission entrusted to him. However, George doubts that Martin has the strength to completely stop the call of evil. Martin and his friends fight their way to the city center, overcoming hordes of monsters. Suddenly, the guy notices that there is a man standing in the middle of the street who was not evacuated in time. Yuna recognizes the stranger as her old mentor from the academy and asks in surprise what she is doing here. The mentor turns to Yuna and says darkly that humans cannot resist such a powerful evil force. Martin cautiously asks who she is and why she is here. Yuna's former mentor claims that she is an employee of the association, carrying out an important secret mission. Martin doubts her words and uses his depth vision skill to scan the stranger.